Get a prompt start. Good morning, all attendees and all presenters and advisory committee members. My name is Joseph Holt, and I'm the chair of the advisory committee for the BPPE. And we're going to go ahead and start our last meeting of the year. I don't know if this is our fall meeting or winter meeting, but certainly our fourth that we've had. As obvious, we're committing or participating in this meeting via WebEx and back to that process, which we're familiar with, of course, from the many months that we were doing it this way previously. I would like to remind and encourage the advisory committee members specifically to have your camera on, if at all possible. Would encourage everyone to keep your cameras on through the meeting if you're able. For clarity, it would be good to state your name when you're making comments at various points throughout the meeting. And with that, we're going to go ahead and jump in with our first agenda item, which is the establishment of a quorum in our attendance call. We'll just go and introduce ourselves in the order as presented on the slide there. As mentioned, my name is Joseph Holt. I'm an institutional representative.
Good morning, this is Margaret Ryder. I'm a consumer representative.
Morning, Robert Boykin, public member.
Good morning, Kenson Chu, public member.
Good morning, Melanie Delgado. I'm a consumer representative.
Good morning, Tess Dubois-Carey, institutional representative.
Hi, good morning, everybody. This is Tracy Pintambassi. I was appointed by the speaker.
Welcome, Tracy.
Good morning, Lee Farron. I'm the vice chair.
And do we have representatives from Senator Roth or Senator Fong's office with us this morning? Doesn't look like it. We do have all of our voting members. So we obviously have a quorum, and thank you all for attending the meeting. I wanted to extend this first agenda item a little bit. We have a special and to me kind of a sad announcement. This will actually be Margaret Ryder's last meeting at the BPPE Advisory Committee, which is a pretty tectonic shift. Certainly deeply appreciate all her many, many years of service. I've only been, direct participant in the last, I think, 6 or so. And I know it goes much farther back than that. So Margaret, you'll be deeply missed. I wanted to maybe open it up and see if you had any parting words of wisdom. Obviously, you'll be here for all of the meeting, but I didn't want to miss the opportunity to recognize your many years of exceptional service.
Well, thank you. I thought it was time. It's been since, I think, 2009, I guess, is when I started serving. No words of wisdom, although I have been sort of reflecting a little bit. And I remember when I first started at the Attorney General's office, my supervisor told me that when she first started there, one of the cases she did was against a fraudulent vocational school. And this was long before the era of federal loans. And then I brought a number of cases when I was there. And it seemed like things were going better, and we took our eye off of it, and things got worse again. It has been a long struggle, and I can't say that I feel like in the time I have been working on these issues that things have been always getting better. The problems have always been getting bigger, but there has been more attention focused on it in recent years. And I'm hopeful in the future that there will be improvements. There seem to have been over the last few years, because it is so important for not just the students, but for the competing schools, for our economy, when students are stuck with loans that can't possibly pay off because they didn't get an education. So it's a critically important area, and I wish you all the best going forward, and I hope you make great progress in the years to come. And I've enjoyed serving on this panel. I think we've had overall really good participants in the committee, and the people who could disagree on policy or issues, but work well and be cooperative. And I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Margaret. Anybody on the advisory committee? Anybody else have words for Margaret?
I just want to
Thank
say,
you, Margaret. I'm sorry.
no, go ahead.
Oh, this is Kenson. I just want to thank Margaret for your services, long-term services. Thank you.
This is Lee, and Margaret, I just want to say thank you for all that you've done over these 14 years. That I have learned so much just from being in meetings with you, and your approach, your critical approach to looking at ways to make the Bureau the best that it can be. And I think that's ultimately what we're all here for. And I'm so grateful that you have dedicated so much time and expertise. So thank you so much. And we will definitely miss you.
And this is Melanie Delgado. Margaret, I would just like to echo what Lee said. It was very well said, Lee. And thank you for your service and everything that you've done to protect students over the years. And thank you for everything that you've done on this oversight committee.
This is Tess Dubois-Carey. Just to layer on, I echo the comments that have been said already, but I just want to say I've also learned a lot from you, and you challenge thought. And that's greatly appreciated, that you always have the courage to challenge and do it in a manner that is respectful and thoughtful with research and time behind it. So I've learned a lot from you in a very short time, and just also want to thank you. You will be missed.
Thanks, everybody. And wrapping up those comments, Margaret, I would like to say that as you pointed out, the members of the advisory committee don't always agree, and certainly you and I, there have been lots of substantive issues that maybe we would take a different position on. But I have deeply appreciated that while our positions may have varied, our interests, I never doubted that our interests were aligned. You want to protect students, and you want to advocate on their behalf. I want to do that as well. Our institutions do. And I would say the vast majority of institutions in the state, that is their goal as well. And it becomes a question of tactics. And in that, you've always been a good faith partner. You've been the hardest worker on the committee, absolutely, without peer. You're always deeply prepared, and your comments have been on point. And there's that old saying, like a dog with a bone. Like if you have an idea, you're not going to let it go. So it will come back up again in the next meeting, or the next meeting, or the next meeting. And I appreciate that, your dogged pursuit of consumer protection, and which is your role on the committee. And so thank you so much for everything that you've done. And you leave a challenge for all of us on the committee in her absence, is she leaves really, really big shoes to fill. That's a lot of work. Particularly, I would argue, for the consumer advocates, that there's a vacuum there that I think will be felt in the near term, but I know all of our committee members are well prepared and will step into that space. Thank you very much, Margaret, for everything that you've done.
I may chime in as well with a few words.
Yeah, please.
Margaret, your expertise, your passion, your commitment they're nothing short of inspiring. You are always pushing for what's right. And again, as everyone has said, in ways that are respectful and smart and persistent. And that persistence makes a difference. And I know it doesn't always end up with exactly the best outcome or the thing that it feels like it should have ended up with, but we're certainly in a better place for your contributions. I've learned so much from you during my time here as bureau chief, and for the decade before that, when we worked together prior to joining the state. And you just have given so much to us. There's quite literally nothing we could do to properly acknowledge or thank you for everything you've done to push the Bureau in the right direction. I know it's not always been the most comfortable places on either side of that, but it's just been really essential to consumer protection and pushing us to do the right thing. And as a very modest thank you, we'll be sending you a certificate in recognition of your service. We will miss your contributions terribly. Thank you.
Thank you all. It was really very kind of you. Very kind words. I really appreciate it.
right, and now on with the rest of our regular business. The next agenda item, I should say, is public comment on items that are not listed on our agenda. I want to make some framing remarks in regards to comments throughout the meeting. This is the singular opportunity that members of the public have to address something that is not already addressed in the agenda. If you have comment on anything in the public materials that have been published in advance, please reserve your comment for that area, and we will definitely open public comment at every section. So you'll have regular intervals by topic in which you can share your comments. An important note, probably the most important note that is true for this public, the comment on non-agenda items and all subsequent, is this public comment is not an opportunity for dialogue between either the commenter and the advisory committee or the commenter and Bureau staff. There are avenues for that, particularly staff. And so if you have specific questions or specific needs, whether you be an institution or a student or some other interested stakeholder, your best avenue for that is to email bppe@dca.ca.gov. And Debbie and her staff will watch that email vigilantly through the course of this meeting and following. And so that's the best way to get, if you want to get into a direct back and forth or resolve an issue, that's the manner for that. The purpose for these public comments here are to share your opinion, your point of view, your experience with the advisory committee in such a way that you inform us as to the issues that matter to you, your institution, or your personal situation. But we won't be able to engage in dialogue or answer questions through these periods. Our moderator, our talented moderator, will facilitate each of these sessions, so we'll hear from her in the specific directions on how to do that at the intervals for those public comments. And we'll start now with as I noted, any comments that members of the public may have for items that will not be covered at any point in the agenda later in our meeting. And I'll hand it over to you, Lesma.
Thank you. This is the moderator. The Q&A is now open. The instructions are on the screen for your reference. If you are logged in and would like to participate, click that question mark inside of a square. It's typically located bottom right corner of your WebEx screen. And type the word comment in the text field that appears and make sure it asks or sends to all panelists before clicking the send button. If you are calling in from a phone, you can raise your hand by pressing *3. And you can also, if you're logged in, you can also have the option of raising your hand by clicking the outline of a hand from the bottom center of your WebEx screen. At this time, I see no request for public comment. Would you like me to close the Q&A feature?
Yes, please. And we will move to agenda item number 3, which is a review and approval of our August advisory committee meeting. We've all had those an opportunity to review in advance. We'll open the conversation now to any comments or maybe suggested revisions or corrections that anyone might have to the minutes. Okay, in absence of any corrections, I would entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
I'll motion for approval. This is Tess.
I'll second. This is Lee.
Thank you, Tess and Lee. So we have a motion and a second. Any discussion on the motion to approve the minutes?
This is Margaret. I just have a question. There was a word, I just wondered if it was the word that was stated or not. It seems kind of an unusual statement. On page 7 of 8, so 14 of the whole list, under agenda item number 6, the second paragraph, the first line, it says, Mr. Dumble outlined some potential 2024 packages. He pointed out the vastness of the language in the minimum operating standards. I didn't know if he really said vastness or not. If that's what he said, fine, but it just seemed a little odd. So I didn't know.
Yeah, I remember his comment was definitely in that vein. I don't know if that's the exact word that he mentioned, but it was the scope. Maybe he said vastly, but I think that catches, in my memory, it catches the spirit of what he was communicating.
That's fine then.
Yeah, I don't recall using the word vastness specifically, but I'm sure the word was something similar.
Any other discussion on the motion? All right, we'll take a roll call vote for approval. I'll start. I'm an aye. And Lee?
Have we taken public comment yet on this?
Oh, no, you're right. I'm sorry, Lynn. Thank you so much. We have not.
Sure.
We'll open up to, before we vote on that matter, we will open to public comment on the review and approval of the minutes.
Moderator, the Q&A is open. The instructions are on the screen for your reference. Just a reminder, if you are logged in, you can click the question mark inside of the square, type comment, send it to all panelists. If you called in, press *3 from your phone to raise your virtual hand. No requests at this time. Would you like me to close the Q&A?
Yes, please. So again, our voting on approval of the minutes, I'm an aye. Lee?
Aye.
And Margaret?
Aye.
Robert?
Aye.
Canson?
Aye.
Melanie?
Aye.
Tess?
Aye.
And Tracy?
Aye.
Good, the motion carries. Thank you very much. And we'll move to, actually, I'm going to juggle the agenda. It's within discretion to reorder events as necessary. To ensure that we have a quorum, we're going to move up agenda item 10, which is the election of our new chair and vice chair, which will be seated at our first meeting for next year. And it's imperative that we have a quorum to be able to do that business. And so we're going to move agenda item 10 up and handle it at this point in the meeting. Several years ago, there was a specific explicit change regarding the chair and vice chair positions, and term limits, if you will, is part of that structure. And I am terming out as the chair of the committee. And I don't know, Lee, I think this was your first year as vice chair, so I don't know that you're termed out per se, but we need to elect every year we elect a new chair and vice chair. And so we will do that at this time. Any committee member can forward another committee member as nominating for either position for the chair or the vice chair. And we will assume that everyone who is nominated is willing to serve unless you communicate otherwise. So if you are nominated and not willing to serve, please speak up quickly before we vote you into that position. So we'll start with opening the nominations for the position of chair of the advisory committee for next year.
This is Margaret. I nominate Lee Farron.
Excellent. Does anybody else have any other nominations for the chair of the committee?
I was going to make the same nomination, so Lee as chair.
Anyone else? Okay, and then I assume, Lynn, it's okay if we get nominations for the vice chair, or do we have to vote and resolve the chair first? Probably doesn't matter. We can do it either way.
That's up to you, how you want to handle that.
Yeah, let's go ahead and do nominations for the vice chair position, and then next. I actually, for myself, I have a nomination for that. I would nominate Tess Dubois Carey, institutional representative, to the vice chair position. Are there other nominations? Okay, hearing none, we will take, we have a singular nomination for chair, which is Lee Farron, and a nomination for vice chair of Tess Dubois Carey. And let's vote on those as a package. So we'll open first for a committee comment on that ticket, if you will, Lee as chair and Tess as vice chair. Any committee comments on those? The single comment I would have is that Leah, strongly support you as chair. Always appreciate your insight and your input, and the fact that you work directly with students, I think is a great insight into the needs of the advisory committee and the mandate. And so I strongly support Lee for chair.
Thank you. I think you wrote my campaign speech for me. Appreciate it.
Oh, I'm also just bubbly excited that I'm not going to be the chair next year. So
Fair.
Part of it is that. Any other comment from the committee? Great. We'll go ahead and open to public comment on our chair and vice chair elections. Elizabeth, would you help us with that?
Yes, this is the moderator. The Q&A is now open. The instructions are on the screen for your reference. If you would like to participate, click that question mark inside a square, type comment, send it to all panelists. If you're calling in, *3 from your phone to raise your virtual hand. No requests at this time. Would you like me to close the Q&A feature?
Yes, please. I'll start our roll call vote. I vote aye. And Lee?
I guess I vote for myself, but I definitely vote for Tess as well. So I vote aye.
Sorry to interrupt here.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, I think I abstained from me, maybe.
Oh, yeah.
No, I wasn't going to say that necessarily,
Okay.
but I think I'm not sure on this, but I think just to be safe, we should take each position and vote it separately.
Okay, no problem. So I'll make a motion that we approve Lee Farron as chair. And do I have a second for that?
This is Melanie Delgado. I'll second.
Thank you, Melanie. And Lynn, can I accept our previous comment and public comment periods and go straight to vote?
I think that's fine.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm an aye for Lee Farron as chair, and Lee, you would abstain, I guess.
Thanks. Yeah, I think I'll abstain.
And Margaret?
Aye.
Robert?
Aye.
Canson?
Aye on both.
And Melanie?
Aye.
And Tess?
Aye.
And Tracy?
Aye.
Excellent. So Lee, you swept into office with a mandate. You have. And then I'll make a motion that we put Tess as vice chair for next year for 2024. Can I get a second?
I'll second.
And having done our committee conversation and public comment period, we'll go straight to a vote. I vote aye. And Lee?
Aye.
Margaret?
Aye.
Robert?
Aye.
Canson?
Aye.
Melanie?
Aye.
And Tess will abstain. Tracy?
Aye.
Excellent. So we have secured our committee leadership for next year. Thank you both for your willingness to serve. And we'll move to our next agenda item, which is agenda item number 4, where we'll hear from the Department of Consumer Affairs and a representative.
Hey everyone, good morning. Everybody hear me all right? Great. So I have quite a bit of updates, so please bear with me. But my name is Yvonne Durantes. I am the Assistant Deputy Director over Board and Bureau Relations here at the Department of Consumer Affairs. I'm happy to be here today, and I want to echo everyone's thank you to Member Ryder and her service. I also want to say that we are very grateful and appreciative of your years of service. So thank you as well. And so I do have quite a bit of updates, but if there's anything that needs to be repeated or anything that you want any clarification on, happy to repeat anything or answer any questions. And so I will dive right in. So starting off, I do want to provide an update on our Business Consumer Services and Housing Agency update. We have had a change of leadership. Secretary Lourdes Castro Ramirez has been appointed as the Chief of Housing and Homelessness in the office of the LA Mayor Karen Bass. And so that was effective November 2nd. And she was an extraordinary partner to DCA and to the boards and bureaus and a relentless consumer protection champion. So we are also very grateful for her service and for her leadership. And we will miss her very much and wish her the best in her new role. And until the new secretary is appointed by Governor Newsom, Tad Egawa, the general counsel at agency, will be serving as the acting secretary. And so we look forward to working with him in the interim. Moving on to a DEI update, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Training does continue to be a priority for the DEI steering committee. In October, 138 DCA leaders and 26 board members completed the DEI human-centered approach training provided by the University of Massachusetts consultant, Dr. Bernard Gibson. On November 7th, yesterday, the University of Massachusetts consultant Christopher Veal also provided a virtual training entitled DEI Dialogue for Leaders to DCA managers, supervisors, and leadership. And so the training included example language and tools to discuss psychological safety and how it impacts conversations around DEI, as well as interactive discussions around challenges leaders are currently facing. And so we do continue to encourage your bureau chief and management teams to attend any future trainings. Excuse me. So DCA does also continue to support boards and bureaus in expanding culturally competent communications to promote the importance of meeting needs for California consumers, licensees, and applicants. And so DCA's Deputy Director of Communications recently met with the Mexican consulate in San Francisco to share information and resources about DCA, as well as to hear about areas of interest to the consulate. The DEI Steering Committee is also pleased to highlight the work of the Board of Vocational Nursing and Psychiatric Technicians, DCA's Tribal Liaison, and DCA's DEI Steering Committee Chair, Yafana Lamar, recently introduced the Executive Officer of the Board of Vocational Nursing and Psychiatric Technicians to Brita Guerrero, which is the Executive Officer of the Sacramento Native American Health Clinic. And so the meeting was to discuss the possibility of tribal health clinics serving as locations for vocational nursing students. And so this is another highlight of our DEI efforts and commitment. And so as more becomes available, or if you do have any additional questions in regard to DEI efforts, or if you have anything to share that your bureau may be working on, please feel free to share that with Board and Bureau Relations. Moving on to in-person meetings and the Bagley-Keene Open Meeting Act. So currently, DCA boards and bureaus may continue to conduct entirely remote public meetings, as you are doing here today, without notice locations accessible to the public throughout December 31st of this year, so long as the public is able to participate in the meeting remotely. However, commencing on January 1st, there will be 4 meeting options that will be available pursuant to the Bagley Open Meeting Act. And so there are 4 options, like I said. Option number 1 is the traditional single location option. This is a meeting where the majority of members are gathered at one publicly noticed and accessible location. No members are participating remotely, and there is no requirement to allow for remote participation. Option number 2 is a traditional teleconference option. Members are located at different publicly noticed or accessible locations, and they are connected via a phone or WebEx, and there is no requirement to allow for remote public participation. Option number 3, which is a new teleconference option, that is a majority of members are gathered at one publicly noticed and accessible location. The extra members have above majority can participate remotely at a non-public site, and the meeting must allow for remote public participation. And option number 4, which is the new advisory body teleconference option. So this one does apply to you. All members of an advisory body can participate remotely from private and non-public meeting sites. The meeting must have at least one publicly noticed accessible location where at least one Bureau staff member is present and where the public can participate in the meeting. Additionally, the meeting must allow for remote public access. And I do also want to note that you will be required to have your camera on. So just want to give you a heads up that that will be effective beginning January 1st of 2024, again, pursuant the new Bagley-Keene Open Meeting Act requirements. So if you do have any questions, please feel free to reach out to your bureau chief, your council, or board and bureau staff as well. Moving on to required board member trainings. So we are getting into the last months of the year, and we do have a December 31st deadline for your sexual harassment prevention training requirement. And so your program is required to complete the non-supervisory sexual harassment prevention training. It is only 1 hour training, and it is available online via our learning management system. It's available anytime. You can take it at your convenience. And if you do happen to have any issues with your login or, remembering whether it's your user, your email, your password, please feel free to reach out to me directly. That is yvonne.durantes@dca.ca.gov. And I will be happy to reset your password or help you with your user ID or whatnot. So please remember that deadline is December 31st. Moving on to out-of-state travel updates. And so recently, Governor Newsom did sign SB 447. That's California's travel restrictions to states that have adopted discriminatory anti-LGBTQ laws did end immediately. And so California's restricted states travel list was eliminated and replaced with a new public awareness project that will consult with community leaders to promote California's values of acceptance and inclusion of the LGBTQ plus community across the country. So over the past years, several out-of-state trips requested by programs were not authorized because the travel was to a state on a restricted travel list. Now, out-of-state travel to all states is permitted if the trip is critical to the functions of your program. And so out-of-state travel requests still must go through the established process for review and approval by DCA, agency, and the governor's office. But again, if you do have any questions, please reach out to your bureau chief or to board and bureau relations. Almost done here. Moving on to our Promise campaign launch, State Employees Giving at Work campaign. And so in partnership with board and bureau members, DCA will continue its tradition of generosity and caring for our communities. And this year's Our Promise campaign at Work officially did kick off in October, and it runs through December 31st. Leading the efforts for this year is DCA's co-chair, Monica Vargas, who is the Deputy Director of Communications, and myself, Yvonne Durantes, Assistant Deputy Director over Board and Bureau Relations. And so this annual campaign does give an opportunity for state employees and board and bureau members as an opportunity to support nonprofits through whether it be a one-time donation or a payroll deduction. And so these contributions do make a positive impact and provide vital resources to a lot of nonprofits of need. And so we hope that you'll join this year's state campaign and contribute to a nonprofit of your choice. If you do have any questions on this as well, please feel free to reach out to me. And continuing on the spirit of giving, and we do have a turkey drive this year on November 14th. Board and Bureau members and staff will also have another opportunity to come together and give back. DCA will be hosting the second annual turkey drive with donations benefiting Joey's Locker, which is a community food bank located in Natomas near DCA headquarters in Sacramento. Donations of frozen turkeys, hams, and chickens, as well as non-perishable food items, will be accepted at 3 DCA locations in Sacramento on November 14th. And so there is more information that has been sent out on our BBR monthly email. And so if you do have any questions, please reach out to your bureau chief. And lastly, if you did miss it, BBR did send out its 2023 fall newsletter, which has a lot of the updates I just provided here, as well as other updates in regards to updates happening in the area or with BBR and bureau member onboarding. So if you do want to check out our fall newsletter, it is available online on our DCA webpage, our board member resources page. And so thank you for bearing with me through all those updates. That is all for me. Happy to answer any questions or clarify anything that I touched on.
Committee members, any question for Ms. Durantes? Okay, hearing none, we're still on agenda item 4, I believe, Debbie, for the IT system project update. Is that accurate? Or is that under the Bureau? Oh, it's under the Bureau operations. That's next section. Okay.
Yes.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for your comments and your time and attention.
Thank you all.
Yeah, we'll go ahead and open for public comment on agenda item number 4 and the remarks we've heard from the DCA representative.
This is the moderator. The Q&A is open. The instructions are on the screen for your reference. If you would like to participate, click on the question mark inside of the square, type comment, and send it to all panelists. For those who are calling in, press *3 from your phone to raise your virtual hand. At this time, I see no request for public comment for this agenda item. I do have a comment that came in, or a question that came in for the previous one, I believe, right after it was closed. Would you like me to read that?
Yes, please.
The question was, can we nominate? And that was from a member of the public.
Thank you.
So no request. Would you like me to close the Q&A feature?
Yes, please.
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. We'll move on to our next agenda item. And that is the meat of our agenda, all of the various updates under the Bureau operations. And so I'll hand it over to Debbie for you to lead us through those sections.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And we are going to start with an IT system project. And for this, we are joined by Bureau staffer Tamika Garvin, as well as Jason Piccioni and Brian Leggett. So I will turn it over to them.
Good morning. My name is Tamika Garvin. I would like to thank you for the opportunity to join you today and thank you for your service, Member Ryder. I am the newly appointed product owner of the Connect system, as well as a staff services manager in the licensing unit. I have been with the Bureau since 2014, and some of the positions that I've held are staff services analyst and an associate governmental program analyst. Before Connect, institutions were only able to mail in an application for approval to operate, and an institution non-accredited and pay by check. Now that we have Connect, institutions can successfully submit the approval to operate application online by desktop, laptop, tablets, or mobile devices, and pay the application fee by credit card. Connect allows the institution to complete the application at their own pace. When the institution submits the application, they're immediately sent emails that include the submission for confirmation, payment confirmation, an acknowledgement form for the agent for service of process, and a verification form for each owner. The licensing analyst can review the application and supporting documentation, and if deficiencies are found, send deficiency letters to the institution for resolution. Having the option to complete and process the online application cuts down on paper and has a faster turnaround time when sending deficiency letters and receiving a response. Some of the common problems reported by the institutions via email or phone calls are when the institutions are unable to log into Connect. This problem is resolved by helping the institution reset passwords or by making sure that they're on the correct URL is being used. In addition, some of the institutions will accidentally resubmit their response before correcting all deficiencies within each application section, or for some reason are unable to view the deficiencies. This problem is resolved by resending the deficiency letter to the institution. I would now like to take the time to provide an update on the last deployment scheduled on August 8th, 2023. There were 38 tickets successfully deployed to improve the non-accredited application process currently in production. No major issues were reported by staff, and minor issues were promptly fixed. Some of the updated functionality included in the deployment were Connect automatically assigns the institution codes and school codes based on the site type, whether it's a main, branch, or satellite. When an application is approved, Connect automatically, the approval automatically transfers to the institution details screen. Status columns have been updated to show when the external form check is pending. Previously, there were issues when clicking on the resubmit deficiency button in the user portal where nothing happened when clicked. However, the deficiency appeared in the back office. This has been corrected, and now when clicking the resubmit deficiency button, the system takes the institution back to the dashboard, and the deficiency reflects in the back office. The location of records table would not save data and is now working correctly. And the military spouse fee waiver SB 607 functionality was added to identify military spouse status and allows the ability to upload documents and submit an application without the fee. We have an upcoming deployment scheduled for mid-November that will contain 39 tickets. Some examples of the updated functionality that will be included in this deployment are: denied applications will automatically transfer to the denial queue. There will be milestones updates. The system will display date fields for incomplete letters sent and incomplete letters response in all queues instead of just showing in the intake queue. 2 new queues will be added to the application tab in a nested way. For example, licensing analyst awaiting assigned queue, analyst queue, and licensing chief queue. There will be an update to the approval process. The application will include a new table called application status that will list various statuses such as approved, conditional approval, intent to approve, denied, abandoned, withdrawn, and non-renewable. This table will show the status as the application is being processed and keep the application history after approval. There will be there will be updates to the upload section. The updated text will be added to the upload section, which previously instructed the institution to click here to complete upload. That will be changed to click here to upload the document. The deficiency sections of the application will be updated to include an add button and a form. The form will have drop downs to identify the deficiency and at what point it was identified. A notes box per deficiency will automatically track the date and the deficiency when it was created and resolved, sorry. The form will also include an edit button. Thank you for allowing me to provide you with the updates on Connect, and I will pass it over to Jason.
Thank you, Tamika. Appreciate that.
No problem.
My name is Jason Piccioni, and I am the Chief Information Officer for the Department of Consumer Affairs, as well as the Agency Information Officer for the BCSH agency. I'm glad to be with everybody this morning. Good morning, Chair Holt and members and Chief Cochran. I think we could advance the slide one more, please. I just want to tack on a little bit to the update that Tamika gave and talk about a little bit of extended progress that we're projecting over the next year. I won't go as far as saying that we're in the groove, but we know where the groove is. We understand we're making great progress in getting ourselves into that groove. And I think that has been evidenced by the 3 past deployments, the STRIF in May, back office improvements in August, and the non-accredited app improvements coming for the middle of this month. And the real reason why I say that we know where the groove is, and we're going to get into that, is because of really a culture shift over the past year, led by Chief Cochran and some key BPPE staff, Tamika Garvin being one of them, Erica, and I forgot Erica's last name, my apologies, as well as others. And I think one of the big culture shifts is the active participation in the development and input into the creation of these improvements and these functionalities by a wider range of Bureau staff. And I think that is increased, and it has continued to pay dividends here in the output. So I think it's a big culture shift, and we may not be directly in the groove, but we're moving in that direction. If we can advance the slide, please. Erica Smith, thank you. Erica Smith is the other staff member. So what happens next after the November deployment? One of the big areas that we've been marching towards is getting away from the sale system and doing a complete conversion. And we are currently have a project plan based targeting October 2024. And that will focus on really 4 major areas, and that's the institution and all of the peripheral information profiles for the institution, programs, branches, et cetera, all the data profile that makes up an institution. In that, just like in any conversion, there will be data quality assessment and cleansing required. We've already started that process in the early stages of that, where we've identified data conditions that need to be looked at by business folks so that we can make sure that that's appropriately either dealt with or known when it goes into the new system. We'll also be focusing on the other application types that we process at the Bureau, and we will focus on STRIF quarterly invoicing and online processing and annual fee invoicing and online processing. And so approximately this time next year, we will be looking at converting off of the sales system into a full Connect deployment. And we see this road to October 2024 with this culture shift that, again, has been spearheaded by Chief Cochran and into really a culture of continuous improvement. So that's why we are targeting October 24th. That's why we believe that these steps that are listed on the slide right here can be achieved in that time frame, and that's what we are aiming for. So that's my update. I don't think I have another slide. I think that's my last slide. But that's my last update, and I'll pass it back to Chief Cochran. Chief Cochran, I just wanted to say one more. I apologize. I didn't want to leave out Brian Leggett as a third leg of that stool. Erica Smith, Tamika Garvin, and Brian Leggett also works from DCA, has been a key partner, a critical partner in our movement lately. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jason, and to Tamika. I would just share the kudos back with you and your team, Jason. I think we certainly, no matter what level of resources or commitment we would have at BPPE, without the steady and knowledgeable hand of OIS and your team, we would still be nowhere. So thank you so much. And I'll turn it back to the chair.
Very good, thank you. Open up for the committee for any questions regarding the IT security update.
Well, I have to say, if there's one issue about which I have been like a dog with a bone, it is this one. The IT system had been a disaster for quite some time. And back when I started with the committee, there were promises of it, being redone within, X number of years, which were many shorter years than we have already passed. So I'm delighted that things are moving along. I do have one question, and that is, and you may not have that information at hand right now, but in the major steps include establishing institutions data to allow for transition to the new system of record. It would be very helpful, I think, if it could be spelled out at the next meeting what data that is. We've talked about this before, and I think there have been oral discussions about the kind of data that is important be transitioned for not just for staff to have at hand, but for consumer protection people, for students and so forth, from the sale data having to do with the complaints, investigations, et cetera, as well as approvals. So I think it would be very helpful if there could be written out a description of all of the kinds of data that would be transitioned. And I also appreciate the detail from Tamika. I think it's hard for us to realize how many little nits there are for every single piece of progress. And so I think that's very helpful for us to understand. And I do add my kudos to what Debbie has done in the time she's been there to get things moving along this towards a better end product. Thanks.
Any other committee comment?
I don't necessarily expect a response at the moment, but I'm curious from the institutional representatives, if any of you, like going forward, if any of you have had experience with the online system and have feedback and can share about, like, is that really working better? Because I mean, I think that's ultimately the goal, is that it works better on both ends. And I know there's feedback obviously coming through the tickets and through, the kind of that system, but I think it'd be helpful for us to hear some of that too, if folks are willing and able to share it at future meetings.
Yeah, that's a great point, Lee. Thanks. All right, hearing no more committee comment, we will open for public comment, and because of the breadth of each of these items, we'll open for each letter under agenda item 5. And so at this time, we'll open for 5A, IT system project, for public comment.
This is the moderator. The Q&A is now open. The instructions are on the screen for your reference. If you would like to participate, click the question mark inside of the square, type comments, send it to all panelists. If you're calling in, press *3 from your phone to raise your virtual hand. At this time, no request for public comment.
Very good, thank you. We'll move on to agenda item 5B and the licensing report.
Perfect. I will just reintroduce to you all Gregory Donkerbrook, who is our licensing chief. I believe it was day 3 or so when at our last meeting. So now he's got a wealth of knowledge that he didn't have yet on day 3. So thank you, Greg.
Good morning, everyone. As Debbie said, I met you all on day 3 with the Bureau back in August. It's great to see you all again. I would also like to add my thanks to Member Ryder for her service. Your absence is definitely going to be felt. So during my first 3 months, I've really been focused on getting to know the overall work and structure of the Bureau, getting to know the licensing unit, including all of the individual staff, really to tap into their expertise, experience, and time with the Bureau. Possibly most related to my presentation today, I've had a really heavy focus on how we track our data and how it's reported and presented to the committee. Currently, I see a number of areas for improvement to our systems and processes. But my main goal is that any implementation of changes that we do are done carefully and purposefully. While I'm still in the process of reviewing existing systems and processes to ensure that we're providing the accurate data for all of our stakeholders, I recognize that there have been some previous suggestions from the committee that we have not quite yet implemented. One of the prior suggestions was adding a column showing change in processing time. I think that was just the last committee meeting. That is not reflected quite yet. One consideration is that, this report is currently comparing only a quarter's worth of data versus our August meeting, which was reflective of an entire year's worth of data. So having a column that's just showing a change and a plus or minus wouldn't necessarily give a great trend analysis. And I do know that showing processing time trends is important to everybody involved. So I'm looking at different ways of presenting that information in the future. I also know that there's been quite a bit of interest in presenting chess clock analysis data to the committee. And I'm currently working on a thoughtful and effective way of presenting this data so that the committee has a better idea of where all of our time goes and is spent during the application review process. I know that's very important to everybody. And lastly, before I get into the numbers in the slide, I do want to reiterate that I am highly focused on producing and presenting quality information and data to all of our stakeholders. And I would always welcome any future suggestions or ideas from the committee. Richie, can you change the slide for me? This slide is similar to the ones you guys have seen in the past. It shows how many applications of the different types we've received and adjudicated for the quarter. I do want to touch on the average days to approve in the last column. Most of these, if you'll notice, do show a slight increase, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have about that to the extent that I'm able. However, these numbers, as well as all of our other data, is being examined as we investigate our processes and systems. In some cases, in fact, the initially calculated numbers actually showed decreases in processing time, but upon review of the individual applications and tracking systems, there appeared to be data errors that were corrected. So like I said earlier, we're really trying to make sure that we're focused on providing accurate data and so that all stakeholders are informed with what they need to know. Richie, you can move on to the next slide. All right, Q1 license application statuses. Our oldest full app in our queue right now is only from June 2nd of 2023. Our oldest full application under review is from 11/30 of 2020. However, we did just receive notice from the institution that they're going to be withdrawing this application. So we are just waiting on that signed letter to be received by the Bureau. Our oldest full renewal application under review is from January 21st of 2020, and we have a pending deficiency letter out with them right now that we are currently waiting on a response to. And then the median date of all of our full apps in queue is at July 31st of 2023. Richie, you can jump to the next slide. Thank you. Currently, this is our locations by type and approval type. Right now we have 967 main locations, 355 branches, 509 satellites for a total of 1831. Of those locations, 423 are approved by means of accreditation, 515 are full approvals, 29 are provisional approvals, and 97 are out-of-state registrations. And before we move on, I did want to just point out that, you know, these location numbers that we are reporting on currently, these numbers are also driven from internal spreadsheets and tracking systems, which we are also investigating and diving into to make sure that we're presenting correct and accurate data for everybody. I know that Member Ryder has asked previously about historical data in regards to location numbers, and I did want to report using previously reported public data that we're only sitting at about 100 less locations currently than we were pre-COVID. So I went back through the publicly reported data to 2018, and so we're only about 100 less than we were pre-COVID. So we're still doing really well in terms of number of locations offered to students in California. Richie, if you want to jump to the next one for me. Our licensing workshops are still going really well. For quarter one of this fiscal year, in July, we had 22 registrants. In August, we had 20. And in September, we had 28. We did just complete our first one for quarter two on October 24th. And then we'll have two more on November 14th and December 19th for quarter two. And that is it for licensing. I'll turn it back over to Debbie or the chair.
Just before turning it over to the chair, I will just say thank you so much again to Greg. You all can clearly hear how much he has just jumped in with both feet and is getting us where we need to be. So again, thank you so much to him.
Thanks, Debbie, and thank you, Greg, for the report. I'll kick off our committee comments and then open, obviously, for others as well. Greg, I appreciate your emphasis on data and reporting for areas, particularly of sort of documented dysfunction, like the length of time that it takes for approvals is, I don't think anybody's satisfied with that from either, whether from internally or your external stakeholders. The focusing on getting the data right, on just demonstrating what the situation actually is in terms of length for approval is important. I would argue, you could even say it's fundamental, right? Like we need to obviously know what we're looking at, but ultimately it's less important than improving the underlying processes. So I'd like to hear from you a little bit, if I could, about what work you've done to not get an accurate picture of how long it's taking, but make it take less time. Like what are the actual functional work that you're doing to improve the outcomes?
Sure. Yeah. It started with, like I said before, I met individually with each member of the licensing staff to talk about what things were working well, what things we could improve on. It also involved diving into all of our written procedures and finding out what procedures needed to be tweaked or still need to be tweaked. Also, if there were potentially any processes that might not actually be written down that we need to get down so that people can make sure they're following the proper process. And then beyond that, it's really, holding everybody accountable to making sure that, we're being responsive to our institutions who are working through this process. Anybody who's been through any sort of licensing or application process, I think one of the biggest keys is that we're responding and acting in a timely manner. So I'm really looking at, as you mentioned before, the chess clock, and really, what is the turnaround when things get to the Bureau and when they bounce back to the institution. But again, we're in a constant state of process improvement. I've made it clear to everybody in licensing as well as the Bureau that we are looking to improve upon everything, whether that's, from how we intake our applications to how we're reviewing them, to make sure that we're providing accurate reviews so that we're not missing things, but that we're getting them done in a timely manner.
Thank you. Comment or question from other committee members?
This is Margaret. I'm sorry.
Margaret.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Okay, it's very quick. I was going to just follow up on what Joseph said, and I'm sorry, there's noise behind me. I don't know how bad it is for all of you, but it's hopefully not as much as it is for me. Okay. I was similarly, I think, Greg, you mentioned the sort of like chess clock analysis. Like, I think while that can be helpful for us, I think what's more helpful is the reason why maybe we were looking for that kind of thing was to help identify where there were roadblocks in the processes themselves. So like, while I don't necessarily know that I need to know that it takes 4 hours and 26 minutes to review this piece of it, so long as I know that it's now takes 2 hours, and it used to take less, So I think, I guess I don't want, at least from my perspective, and I don't want to speak for the whole committee, but from my perspective, I care less about like that chess clock analysis and more about the overall, like, are people feeling like they are being able to do their job efficiently? Are institutions feeling like things are getting processed in an appropriate time frame? The kind of the overall perspective on it. And while that smaller analysis can be helpful, it's not necessarily determinative, if that makes sense. So that was my only comment.
Yeah, it definitely does make sense. And, the chess clock analysis, while we might piece it together on a small scale here internally, any presentation of chess clock analysis data would be a more, in theory, a broad perspective. So like, we're spending this much time versus the institutions are spending this much time. So it wouldn't be necessarily like, for 1.5 weeks, I spent reviewing X, Y, and Z, and then I spent, this. So I definitely see your point. And we definitely want to get to the root of how we can become the most efficient version of ourselves. And so I'm really looking at everything we're doing across the board to make that happen.
This is Margaret. Later in the meeting, we have a discussion about renewals and what time should be involved and so forth. And looking at that, it sort of focused me on this issue. If the school submits, well, let me ask you this. The way it looks to me is if a school wanted to get its renewal by the time its existing approval expired, it would likely have to submit its application a year or two before its approval expired. If you go by the 193 days or 380 days for renewal average time. And it seems to me that's probably not practical or feasible. And then it did raise the question to me, and I guess it's sort of the same issue you're talking about, is trying to figure out where all this time is going. That it seems like, we definitely want it to be done well, but it seems like it's taking an awfully long time, and it would be very important to figure out if this is where that bulk of the time is, whether it's schools that haven't submitted an application that's really complete and can be used, or whether there are certain parts of the approval process that are just taking a much longer time, or whether the staff has too many applications to process and you really need more staff, or what really is the issue. Because it seems like what's happening right now on your renewal is if somebody submits an application by the end of their 5 years, then they're going to have another year or more operating without having on approval. They're going to be in that situation where they're offering courses, but they still don't have an approval. It's just going under their old approval. And when the legislature said 5 years, I think it meant 5 years, not 6 years or 6.5 years or whatever. But that's in practice what's happening. So I think, this has really focused my attention much more on what is the issue? Is it lack of staff? Are the schools resubmitting because they're not getting it right the first time? Or are there parts of the process that are taking inordinate amounts of time for some reason? Or none of that, and it can't go any faster. But I think that's really crucial to get those things figured out to help us also with looking at how you deal with renewals under the regulations.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's definitely something that we're diving into. I think, one of the reasons why I harp on data so much is because, when we have our data tracking system set up in a way that we can really accurately gauge where things are in the process and how long it takes at each step, we can kind of identify, okay, this is an area of opportunity, and then tweak and tailor processes accordingly. But the renewal piece is definitely something that Debbie and I have sat down and talked about quite often. And so it definitely is on our radar for getting after it pretty quickly.
Another question I guess I would have is, in your talking with the staff, regardless of the data, anecdotally, are you hearing opinions about where staff thinks that there are backlogs, or what the reasons they are seeing for why it takes so long? Are you hearing, at least anecdotally, any of their discussion about where the issue is?
I think that there are so many different situations that have been brought up, and so we're really taking a look at incorporating all of that feedback that I got from the staff, and each one of them is seeing it through a different lens, kind of how we all see things through a different lens. And so I think that I'm just taking every issue they're bringing up one at a time and seeing if there's ways we can either change it, improve upon it, eliminate it if necessary, to help make sure that we are getting things done efficiently and accurately.
So you would say that there's not any area where there's kind of a cluster of people saying, here's an issue we have?
I think, no, honestly, I think that because we have a good number of licensing staff, and we have a really good breadth and depth of experience with our staff, they were able to present a wide array of things for us to look at and examine, for us to potentially be able to change, tweak, modify for us in the future.
Thanks.
Absolutely.
Any other committee comment or questions for Greg? All right, well, congratulations on completing your introductory period. Now it's straight to it. Lots of work to get done. Right, we will open for public comment on agenda item 5B, the licensing report.
This is the moderator. The Q&A is now open. The instructions are on the screen for your reference. If you're logged in and would like to participate, click on that question mark inside of the square, type the word comment in the text field, and send it to all panelists. If you're calling in, press *3 from your phone to raise your virtual hand. At this time, there are no requests for public comment. Would you like me to close the Q&A feature?
Yes, please. Move on to agenda item 5C and the quality of education report.
And I will also just flag, speaking of jumping in with both feet, I've actually asked Greg to also give our update for QEU, just because Ebony Santee, our education administrator, isn't able to be here today with us. Thank you, Greg.
Of course. Hello again. No, Rich, you can go to the first slide for me. So similar to last time, the first slide is just a summary of our 1247 institutions, ones that were approved to offer programs prior to January 1st of 2015. This slide has actually had no changes since our last meeting. If you have any questions about it, when we get to the end, I'll be happy to dive in or take notes for Ebony to get back to you. Richie, if you want to jump to the next one. Thanks. Our next slide, institutions after 2015, January 1st, 2015. This one actually we had a slight change. We had 2 more schools become accredited, and we did have 2 schools surrender their degrees. So just a small change there. And again, if there are questions, we can review those at the end. This slide is just an aggregation and summary of the data on the previous 2 slides, excluding those institutions that are still pursuing accreditation. Again, it's just kind of adding those 2 slides together. It's just a different visual representation for the committee to get an idea of where these schools are at. And then lastly, this is just a visual representation, just like last time, of the accrediting agencies for successful 1247 institutions. Our top 3 accreditors for this one still remain the same as last quarter. WASC Senior College and University Commission, Transnational Association of Christian Colleges and Schools, and Distance Education Accrediting Commission. And with that, I will open it up to questions, or I'll refer it back to the chair if he wants to do that. But it's pretty similar to last time for you guys.
Thanks, Greg. Any committee question or comments on quality of education? I actually have one, Greg, given that you're reporting on both sides. I recall from a conversation in earlier committee meetings that this issue, the quality of education unit, is a substantial source of delays for those full licensing applications. That it's an area that I've heard, at least anecdotally in earlier meetings, that's where a lot of applications get stuck. And given your fresh set of eyes in all the conversations that you've been having, do you agree with that assessment? Do you think this is a specific area where we could look to improve timelines for full applications and renewals?
I definitely think it's one of the areas of focus that we're diving into. I think that me and Ebony are going to be working really closely to look at what's being done in licensing versus quality of education, and as far as the review process goes. One thing that I'm still, being honest, digging into and learning is I really want to ensure that we're not double dipping work. You know, like if licensing is signed off and reviewed a section, we definitely want to ensure that we're not double reviewing or making things harder for institutions. So that's one thing I'm still learning about and digging into. But I definitely see it as a potential area for us to improve our timelines.
And follow-up, is there a material difference in the scope of review by the quality of education unit on a initial full application compared to a renewal application? Or is there this same depth, breadth, and rigor of the academic review for a renewal? And you may not know, that might be too detailed for your pitch.
That one I'm going to have to get back to you on. Okay. I've been digging so much into the licensing processes themselves. I haven't gotten a chance to review all of the procedures and processes for QEU, but we can definitely touch on it in the future if you guys want to.
Got it. Any other committee questions or comments?
This is Tracy. I have a question.
Yeah.
And this is something that Greg may not be able to answer, and maybe others can refer me. So still being new, my question is, when a degree program is surrendered or essentially closed, let's say, What happens to the students in those programs? Are there regulations that require how an institution or organization notifies those students? And is there an advisory process that's required or a teach out of those programs? Can anybody refer me to that, some of that information?
Debbie, did you want to speak to that?
Yes, we do have regulations that do speak to that. I don't have the code sections right at hand, but we do have regulations. And generally speaking, there needs to be teach out programs or refunds to the students if teach outs are not available.
Great, thank you.
And I would also add on to that, Tracy, like we are also working on our processes for how we process and acknowledge withdrawals and surrenders of both applications and approvals. And so we'll be touching on that in the future, I think.
Great, thank you.
Yep.
This is Margaret. I'm not sure if this is this point, you're on this point or the prior one. So if you would bear with me on that. How far in advance of a school's expiration date for their approval could they submit an application for renewal? Is there any limitation on that? Could they do it 2 years into 3 years into their approval period? Or is there something that prevents them about what information is required so that they wouldn't be able to do it until only a month before the expiration or only 6 months before the expiration or something like that?
There's nothing that, to my knowledge, there's nothing that prevents them from submitting it early. However, when we're looking at our workload and how we're going to be, processing them in the order that they're received, if a school were to submit, let's say they pick 8 months prior to their expiration, if we have other schools who have submitted a week before their expiration, in theory, we're going to work towards processing the one that's closer to their approval expiration rather than the one that's a year out. Now, that being said, as a bureau, we don't even start sending them reminder notices of their upcoming expiration until 6 months. So, most of the renewals that we're receiving are nowhere close to being 6, 8, 12 months out in advance. And so even if they submitted it, it would just sit there. Additionally, there are requirements of the renewal that they would have to possibly submit more documentation when we got around to reviewing the renewal application that would, possibly be a hindrance and make them even more frustrated with the process rather than submitting it close to their expiry.
Any other questions or comments from the committee? All right, we will open. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I just wanted to follow up. I would just point Tracy to Title 5, California Code of Regulations, Section 74240. That speaks to unaccredited degree granting institutions that elect to stop pursuing accreditation and what the requirements are for those.
Okay, with no other committee comments, we'll open to public comment for agenda item 5C in the quality of education report.
This is the moderator. The Q&A is open. The instructions are on the screen for your reference. If you would like to participate and are logged in, you can click on the question mark inside of the square, typically bottom right corner of your WebEx screen, type the word comment and send it to all panelists. If you're calling in, you can raise your virtual hand by pressing *3 from your phone. No requests? Would you like me to close the Q&A?
Yes, please. We'll move to agenda item 5D, the annual report update.
Perfect. Well, welcome back, Elizabeth Elias.
Good morning, members of the committee. First, I would like to thank Member Ryder for her dedication to the Bureau and as a consumer advocate, and to Member Holt for his time as the chair. For the annual report staffing update, I am so pleased to report that we have filled our manager vacancy and promoted Cheryl Lardizabal from our Bureau's discipline unit. We currently still have 2 remaining vacancies in the annual report unit, but we are in the recruitment process and we are working as quickly as possible to fill those positions. Next slide. The 2022 annual report is due on December 1st of this year. The portal did open on August 1st. And as a reminder to all institutions, the annual report is comprised of really 2 main components. One part of the report is submitted through the online portal, which includes the institution and program data, the school performance fact sheets, the catalog, enrollment agreements, and the graduate identification data. And then the second part is the financial statements, which are required to be submitted to the Bureau attention to the annual report unit, and they do have to be mailed in. Next slide. This next slide is a visual representation of the number of institutions who have started the process to submit their report. This is not an indication of how many schools have submitted a completed report. It's just how many institutions went into the online portal to begin entering data into the different various workflows that they need to submit. One area that I would like to highlight, this current year, we have seen an increase of institutions submitting their data earlier in the year, and we are hoping to get better compliance with this 2022 report due to our efforts of working with the schools to get them into compliance with their 2021 annual report. And one other thing I'd like to highlight, we first presented this data back in the first quarter of fiscal year 22-23, and at that time, in 2021, we had noted that there were 106 institutions for the 2021 reporting year that had not even gone into the system to submit the report. And this new data reflects that we only have about 18 institutions that have not initiated that process. So we have made great efforts to get the institutions into compliance with this requirement. Next slide. The annual report unit has conducted 2 workshops in this current fiscal year. The workshops are to aid the institutions in understanding the laws and regulations as they relate to the school performance fact sheets. And although not listed on this current slide, we do have 4 upcoming workshops for the school performance fact sheets. And the next one is scheduled for December 22nd, 2023. And institutions can register online by visiting the link identified on the slide. And lastly, this is a really busy time of the year for the annual report unit. And I would like to recognize them for all of their efforts as we work through the reports. And that concludes my report. So I turn it back over for any questions or comments.
Open up to the committee for any questions or comments for Elizabeth. All right, very good. Hearing none, we'll move to public comment for agenda item 5D, an annual report update.
This is the moderator. The Q&A is open. Instructions are on the screen. Logged in, you can press the question mark inside a square, type comment, send it to all panelists. If you're calling in, press *3 from your phone to raise your virtual hand. No requests at this moment. Would you like me to close the Q&A feature?
Yes, please. Move to agenda item 5E, the compliance and discipline report.
Okay, I will start with the compliance unit. Since the last advisory committee meeting, we have hired 3 new compliance analysts who are tasked with conducting inspections of institutions. They are currently undergoing onboarding and training. The compliance unit is almost filled. We have only one vacancy left, which I'm really happy to report. And we do expect this position to be filled by the end of the year. Next slide. In Q1 so far, the Bureau has conducted 63 compliance inspections. This is slightly lower than last year's average, but it can be attributed to staffing and through the summer months, staff being out of the office. We conducted 51 announced inspections and 12 unannounced inspections. Next slide. And next slide. A little more than 50% of the inspections resulted in violations being identified. 10 institutions received a notice to comply, and 24 institutions were referred to the discipline unit for material violations identified through the inspection. Next slide. The compliance unit has conducted 3 workshops so far this year. Workshops are conducted to aid the institutions in understanding the Bureau's laws and regulations as it relates to the inspection process. The next workshop is scheduled for tomorrow, and we do have additional upcoming workshops. The link is listed there for anyone who would like to register. Next slide. We're moving on to my discipline unit update. We do have 2 vacancies. One of them is attributed to Cheryl's promotion. So we're quickly trying to backfill those positions. The recruitment has closed and we are in the process of scheduling interviews. We also hope to have those positions filled by the end of the year. In Q1, we have had 1 decision, which was a revocation of an institution's approval to operate. This stemmed from an accusation, which is a charging document against an institution who is approved by the Bureau. Next slide. In Q1, we had 1 denial upheld. This was due to an institution withdrawing their appeal, and this was related to either a new or renewal application that was denied by the Bureau. Next slide. So far, we have not had any automatic suspensions in Q1 or emergency decisions. Next slide. We currently have 12 cases that are currently pending adjudication at the Attorney General's office. 8 of those cases have had their charging documents filed and are currently pending adjudication. The cases that have been filed are considered public, and those accusations and or statement of issues can be found on the Bureau's website. Next slide. The Bureau has issued 61 citations in Q1. This is consistent with the volume of citations that we've issued in the last 2 quarters. I also expect us to maintain this pace as we work through the enforcement referrals we have received. And this is a direct result of streamlined business processes, which have been proven to be more efficient. Also, at this time, I would like to applaud the discipline team for their continued efforts and willingness to take on this additional pressure that I've put on them. And I really appreciate their hard work. And then next slide. And lastly, this is a reminder that disciplinary actions can be found by month on the Bureau's website, and the link is provided for anyone who would like to follow up on that. And that concludes my report for the compliance and discipline units.
A question or comments from the committee?
Can you please remind me on the website where I would locate the 12 cases referred to the Attorney General's office?
So the cases are not listed by which cases have been referred, but if you go to the previous slide, please, where it says disciplinary actions by month, if you see, if you pull up one of the months and you see disciplinary actions filed,
that will indicate which schools had actions filed against them. And then disciplinary outcomes would be which decisions resulted from those actions that were filed. So that's where you would find it. You would find it through this monthly action list. And then you could go to the school's name and pull up the actual disciplinary action to see the details of the accusation and or statement of issues.
So the 12 that are listed on the chart, I guess it's on page 48. If I wanted to find those 12, I mean, these have been filed, but would they be listed under the month they were filed at the AG's offices? I would have to look for each month and find them there?
Correct. You would have to look at each month.
And how far back do these 12 go as to when they were filed?
I do not have that information for you at this time.
It could be as much as a year or more ago, or less than that, would you say?
It can sometimes be more than a year, depending on cases which are currently pending a hearing. Sometimes hearings can be postponed or scheduled far out. So there are times where they can be going back as far as a year.
So I have a comment, which is not anything that you need to respond to, but this is one of the things that needs to be made much more transparent in setting up or revising the website and how these things are reported, so that a person could go on there and, you know, there would be some place that would just, without too much clicking here and clicking there, you'd be able to see, oh, these were the cases sent to the AG's office, you know, in the last 12 months or whatever, somehow, so that it's a lot simpler for the public to be able to see what's going on.
There is a link that's civil and criminal cases filed by other entities, and that has 8 cases listed in it. So I'm assuming that those are the 8 cases that are filed by the AG. So I do think that it may not be as clear, but I think that there is that. I don't think you have to go by month to get those 8 cases. It seems like those 8 at least are separately listed, at least from what I was looking at. But maybe I'm wrong about what those 8 cases are.
Where are you seeing that?
Good question. So if you go to enforcement, and then under compliance, inspections, and disciplinary actions, it's the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 link down that says civil and criminal cases filed by other entities. But it looks like some of those are filed by DAs too. So I'm not sure if that's the same list, but at least there's one place where there are filed cases, like court cases, separately listed.
Just to clarify on that list, those are actual civil and criminal cases that are filed, not cases filed by the Bureau for Administrative Actions. So we do not have just to clarify, we do not have a list that outlines the 8 cases that are currently filed with the AG's office. The only way you would be able to identify that is through the monthly list to see which cases have been filed in that specific month.
Okay. Well, then that would be helpful, Margaret. I agree with you to have a separate place to find those other ones.
Right. Thank you.
Elizabeth, I have a question in regards to the compliance visits. What sort of system is in place for prioritization of selecting schools or campus sites for compliance visits? Is it related to the length since the last compliance visit? I know there's a gap that we've described in earlier meetings against like the mandated service level, like where the Bureau is running under its total allotted amount of compliance visits that are necessary. And so given that, and as we try to progress and improve in that area, how are you picking, and you don't need to be very specific, but I'm just curious, is there a sort of a logical process to identify areas of risk and address those?
Currently, due to volume, primarily it is based on the length of time since the last inspection for an institution. However, that said, we do continually evaluate need based on information received from various areas of the Bureau, whether that be investigations, the annual report unit, discipline, et cetera, to identify schools who do have a higher risk factor. And we are working on developing additional tools so that we can address those schools that have a higher risk.
Good. So if you see a pattern of complaints or an increase in volume, that you might have them jump queue and do a compliance inspection sooner than otherwise.
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, good. Any other questions or comments from the committee? Very good. We will open for public comment on agenda item 5E, the compliance and discipline reports.
I'm sorry, Joseph. This is
Oh, yeah,
Margaret.
please.
Just
Yeah,
before we do that, what I guess I would recommend then is that if it's not a big deal, and again, I know that we ask a lot of data reporting, which takes away from your actual doing work. I think it would be helpful if those cases that are public now, because they have been referred to the AG, if they could just be listed, with a status on them in what's reported to the committee. I think that'd be very helpful. Thanks.
Got it. So we'll go ahead and open for public comment for the compliance and discipline report.
This is the moderator. The Q&A is now open. The instructions are on the screen for your reference. If you are logged in and would like to participate, click the question mark inside of the square, type the word comment, and send it to all panelists. Those who are calling in, you can press *3 from your phone to raise your virtual hand. I do have a request from Ashley Seeley. I'm going to send a request to unmute your microphone and share if we can confirm what is the time limit for the public comment.
It is 2 minutes, I believe.
Thank you.
Excuse me, it's a 3-minute time limit. A 3-minute time limit.
Perfect. Thank you. And Ashley, I just sent a request to unmute your microphone.
1. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. I am an institution representative, and I just had a quick question regarding the compliance workshop that is scheduled for tomorrow. I'm on the Bureau's website, and I clicked the link to register, and it looks like it's not letting me register. It's asking for a meeting ID. And I clicked on the one scheduled for December 6th, and it looks like I can register for that one, but not the one tomorrow. And just wanted to let y'all know that and see if we could get that fixed, because I'd love to attend.
Very good. Thank you for your comment. And I would encourage you to email. You can email directly to bppe@dca.ca.gov for a request for support on that. And Debbie might have some staff follow up as well. Any other public comment?
This is the moderator. No further requests. Would you like me to close the Q&A?
Yes, please. Okay, committee, we're going to, at this point, we're going to take a brief 5-minute break so everybody can use the restroom, stretch their legs. Anticipate, can't say for certain, but looking through the rest of the agenda, we'll reconvene in 5 minutes and expect that we'll be able to make it through the remainder of our agenda before we would need a lunch break. But we'll have to play that by ear depending on, obviously, the amount of dialogue. So we're going to take a quick 5-minute break and reconvene. Okay, it is 11:18. We'll go ahead and jump back in. Committee members, if you could turn on your camera, I can take a visual cue and see that we've got everybody here. And Robert, are you back? Kansan Chu, are you on?
Yes, I'm trying to figure out how to turn on my camera.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Chairman, I suggest we take an official roll just to make sure.
Oh, you want to?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll
I'm back as well too.
So I don't have to put my makeup on, huh?
We'll go ahead and do an official roll call. I'll start. I'm here. Joseph Lee is here.
Present.
Margaret.
Present.
Robert.
Present.
Thank you. Kansan.
Here.
Melanie.
I'm here.
Tess?
Here.
Tracy?
Tracy did let me know that she needed to step away.
Oh, she stepped away. Okay, got it. So we are still at 7 members and still have 7 voting members. And have we had a representative from Senator Roth's office join, or Assembly Member Fong? Okay, very good. So we have our group back together. We will proceed. Thank you all for the break and the prompt return. We'll move on with agenda item 5F, the complaint and investigation report.
And we'll welcome Daniel Rangel.
Good morning, committee members, and thank you, Debbie. Like everyone else, I'd like to echo my appreciation for Margaret's commitment to the committee and the Bureau. One of the things that we talk about internally is how everything rises and falls on leadership. And I think that that does start with the advisory committee members and, and how they challenge us and to be better and do better for our stakeholders. And I think there's no one more that does that more than Margaret, especially, in my section with investigations, a lot of questions that I get. So greatly appreciated. And then also thank you to Mr. Holt for his time as the president. I think the same could be said for him. So, appreciate that. And the other thing too that I would like to echo is, one thing that Jason Piccioni mentioned was, a change in culture. And I think that starts with our leadership internally with Debbie. And we are going through a change in culture and challenging ourselves to be accountable for our actions and to be better and to continue to grow and improve processes. So I definitely, know the feeling that Greg, my colleague, is in, coming into a new situation and trying to feel his way through it and figure out, where do we go from there. But it is more than just change in processes and procedures. It truly is a change in culture and embracing that culture and to make sure that we do better and that our future is better. So, thank you for your commitment, Margaret, and challenging us to be better. So I'll go ahead and start with a quick update on the unit. We currently have 2 vacancies, one manager position and one analyst position. Since the last advisory committee meeting, we filled a vacant analyst position and a vacant office technician position. So welcome to Jared and Martel, who have filled those positions. We're happy to have you aboard. Let's go ahead and go to the first slide, Richie. So complaints received. Through the first quarter of this fiscal year, we saw a decline in the number of complaints received. Last fiscal year, we received an average of about 280 complaints per quarter. So through quarter 1 of this fiscal year, we received a total of 217 complaints. Slide. This is an updated slide. So previously, this slide showed the breakdown between contracted and non-contracted school complaints. However, we wanted to break that down further to show non-jurisdiction and unapproved complaints that we're receiving. So compared to last fiscal year, most categories remain the same in terms of percentage, except for the unapproved schools. We are seeing an increase in the percentage of unapproved schools in this first quarter compared to last fiscal year. Next slide, please. So this is the closed complaints. So in fiscal year 22-23, we closed 757 total complaints, which is an average of about 190 closures per quarter. Through quarter 1 of this fiscal year, we have closed 277 complaints, which is a 45% increase over the last fiscal year's quarterly average. Next slide, please. Days to close. So due to the high number of pending complaints, it has taken us longer to assign complaints for investigation. As mentioned in previous meetings, our goal is to complete investigations within 180 days. As of the end of the fiscal year, 22-23, we did have report out in our performance measurements to the Department of Consumer Affairs our 12-month average for that fiscal year, which was 179 days. So we're right pushing up on that 180 days. But we do anticipate that this number is going to continue to rise. We really received a significant amount of complaints in a very compact time period within like a 2-year period. I think the previous 2 fiscal years we received more complaints than we had in the previous 10 years in each of those fiscal years. So we're dealing with a large group that's kind of moving and aging at the same time that we're trying to address. So we do anticipate that the days to close will increase as we're working through that. Next slide. So this is the case disposition. So this is a breakdown of our case closures by disposition. For the most part, the percentages for each category are consistent with fiscal year 22-23. However, one area that may stand out is our consolidated cases. As we look at the most efficient ways to conduct investigations, we're finding many opportunities to consolidate cases to be worked as one investigation rather than multiple separate investigations. So just to kind of give you an idea of what that looks like, for example, in the previous fiscal year, we had 1,100 complaints that we received, and they were against 705 schools. So there was a lot of opportunity for us to kind of consolidate those complaints and work them as one rather than multiple, 1,100 individual complaints. So therefore, whenever feasible, we are looking to consolidate those cases upon assignment to staff so that we can work through them more efficiently. Next slide, please. So these are the top allegations of the cases that are referred to the discipline unit. The improper school closure and unapproved institutions continue to be our top 2 allegations, which is consistent from last fiscal year. This is the close at intake. So these are the breakdown of the closures at intake. So last fiscal year, duplicate entry was our highest number. Through the quarter 1 of this fiscal year, consolidated cases is our highest number. So the cases that are consolidated at intake are generally the unapproved schools. So if we get multiple complaints against a potentially unapproved school, those are easy to consolidate at the intake level, where they don't require the further analysis to determine whether it's feasible, like the ones that are the open investigations do. Next slide, please. So this is our pending caseload. So we continue our efforts to address the aging caseload through increasingly efficient investigations. However, due to the significant number of complaints we received, again, in roughly a 2-year period, we have a large number of aging cases that are aging simultaneously, which have now moved past the 1-year threshold. So there's a jump in that 1 to 2 year mark compared to last fiscal year or the last advisory committee meeting. We anticipate the aging numbers to continue to rise as we diligently work through these cases. These cases remain a priority along with our urgent cases. Next slide, please. So this is our pending caseload count. So in April of 2023, we peaked at about 850 pending cases. Through the end of quarter 1, that's the end of, which is September 30th, we had about 765 pending cases. We anticipate being under 700 cases by the end of quarter 2. So we are beginning to see that trend line go down and that being a combination of both receiving a lower number of complaints, but also the efficiency that I talked about in our last advisory committee meeting that we're continuing to see our staff build upon and begin to close cases and move those forward in a more efficient manner. Next slide, please. And this is just the impact snapshot of the positive impact on students through the first quarter of this fiscal year. And that concludes my presentation. I just also want to thank my team for all of their effort and dedication. And we've really set the bar high for our investigations unit, and we are seeing staff meet that high bar and exceed that high bar, and we're appreciative of that, and know that we're going to continue to trend in that direction moving forward. And with that, I'll turn it back over for any questions.
Open for comment or questions from committee members?
I have a comment and a question. The comment on the consolidation of cases, I really applaud that, because not only is it make some more efficiencies, but if you have multiple complaints related to a particular school, the investigation may turn up a more significant issue that needs to be dealt with. Whereas if you're just dealing with them one student at a time, you don't necessarily see that whole picture. So I think that's a great thing that you're working towards that. The question I have is the increased number of complaints, do you think, or do you have anything that would help decide whether that is a blip or a trend?
I think it was definitely a trend for the previous 2 fiscal years. We're starting to see that trend go down in this first quarter. So I'm hoping that becomes a trend, that we're seeing, that it gets back to what we were used to seeing more consistently in years prior to the last 2 fiscal years. So I think that's could be attributed to the investigations that we already conducted and addressed with schools, whether that's through helping them obtain compliance or issuing a citation, or even accusations that we filed where we're holding those schools accountable. We hope that that's contributing to the decline in complaints from students.
Thanks.
And one thing that I forgot to mention that I did want to acknowledge, that Mr. Holt had asked a question about providing the number of days to close a complaint with excluding duplicates or other type of administrative closures. So we are working to pull those numbers together to provide that in a future meeting. But I did want to acknowledge that I had that in my notes and I kind of skipped over it accidentally. So apologize for that.
Good. Yeah, I had a similar question. I came from a different angle, but jotted down. So thanks for addressing that. One way that depending on which is easier for you, another way you could do that is to report on the time to closure for the closed at intake complaints. So you said you can identify these complaints were closed at intake. What is the time for that? That would be another way of looking at it, but you understand the question and where we're getting to, and I would encourage you to do that. I have a follow-up question. I appreciate, Margaret, your perspective on the advantage of consolidating cases. I think that's good. There's one danger or one risk that I wanted to confirm that you're addressing, and that is confirming that consolidated cases do not in any way disadvantage any individual student within a group whose complaints have been effectively consolidated. So if 6 students make complaints and they're on the same topic and you consolidate them, that consolidation doesn't disadvantage any one member of that group. So they would all get relief appropriate for their individual situations, which may vary, right? Like they might have had different degrees of harm.
Yes, and that's why, as I mentioned, when the complaints get opened up, it kind of goes through a more rigorous review process before determining whether or not it's feasible to consolidate the cases. So if the potential harm or the egregiousness of the complaint are very widely, then it's probably not feasible for us to consolidate those cases. A student that's complaining about, I didn't get my proof of training, I completed this school and I need my proof of training to go get my license, versus someone who's, complaining about something more egregious, we likely wouldn't consolidate those matters and address them separately. So we do look at whether or not it's feasible to consolidate them, and again, making sure that it's the same location. A lot of times if it's the same program, so there's a lot of different things that we take into consideration. But yes, making sure that no one is not receiving the attention that they should based on their complaint.
And one other thought that I wanted to share is if anticipating an increase in time to closure as you work through that increase in complaints, reallocation of resources or anything creative or outside the box. I know you're doing dancing as fast as you can in a lot of ways. And I also heard like the whole task force approach. I know Debbie had mentioned in past that maybe wasn't as effective, like trying to bring in guest people to try to work through that has its own risks. But looking in terms of load balancing generally, I think this is one of the key core function of the Bureau is effective and timely resolution of student complaints. And so there's just an element of it where it causes a little bit of tension to say, yeah, it's a lot, so we're just gonna keep chipping away at it over the next year. Like not super happy about that from a student perspective, right? Like in terms of allocation of resources, because again, I think it's fundamental to the mission and scope of work for the Bureau. And Daniel, that isn't a criticism. I know you're doing good work with the resources available, but it's, as you mentioned, a high bar. It is a high bar, and we need to make sure that we have appropriate resource allocation to improve that time to close.
Yes, and I think that we have the resources that we need to address it, and part of it is talking about, we've talked about all the changes that we're going through and the staff turnover, and I talked about how even the staff that have been here for quite some time are also going through the similar amounts of change because of the updates that we're making with our program. And one of the things that I'm seeing is the tremendous strides that staff are making, and just looking from year to year comparisons. I think one of the things that I evaluate is making sure that we are making progress and we are growing, we are getting better. And I think that the trend line of the pending cases that we have is starting to decline. So we are being more efficient in our investigations, and I anticipate that we're going to continue to be more efficient. And one of the signs that gives me that confidence is that just looking at myself and comparing my first year to my second year, I got here in January of 2022. And through 2022, we completed about 786 investigations. When we're pulling our monthly stats through the end of October, we had surpassed that number in 10 months. So we are seeing the growth, and that's attributed to the great strides that staff are making, and we're even talking to them individually and showing them, this is what you did in 2022. This is where you're at in 2023. You've already surpassed what you did in 10 months. So those type of growths and that we're seeing, and we're going to continue to see, because as we stated, we set the bar high. Not everybody's hitting that mark yet, but they're getting there. They're reaching for it. We feel the sense of urgency. We feel the weight of the importantness of what we do. And staff are committed and buying in, and that goes to the culture that we're trying to build in the Bureau, and led by Debbie. So we appreciate that support that she gives us, and we're holding ourselves accountable. So I think that though the number is going to rise a little bit, I think that we're gonna move through it quicker as we continue on. So just wanted to share some of that.
Thank you. Committee members, any other questions or comments for Daniel? Very good. We'll move to public comment for agenda item 5F, the complaint and investigation report.
This is the moderator. The Q&A is now open. The instructions are on the screen for your reference. If you would like to participate, click that question mark inside of the square, type comment, and send it to all panelists. If you called in, press *3 to raise your virtual hand. No requests at this time. Would you like me to close the Q&A?
Yes, please. Move to agenda item 5G, the OSAR report.
Turn it to Scott Valverde.
Thank you, Debbie. Appreciate that. Scott Valverde, Chief of the Bureau's Office of Student Assistance and Relief. I also want to jump in and say my thanks to Margaret as well and her contributions, not only to the Bureau and the Advisory Committee broadly, but to OSAR narrowly. Very much appreciated, and in particular, thinking back to when we first started in those early days of 2017-18 as OSAR came into existence. It's always a critical time standing up a program, and I remember those early meetings, receiving your always constructive and thoughtful feedback about OSAR and how its mission could support the larger Bureau mission and support the STRIF unit in particular and all those things. And I can say that, speaking personally, that was not always the most comfortable seat to be sitting in, hearing that constructive feedback. But in retrospect, it was always helpful and always coming from a place and a spirit of propelling us forward. And that is to be valued for sure. And, I think made us better and as a result, provide better services to students, which as Joseph mentioned earlier, that's what we're all here to do. And so, feeling that discomfort, as many have referenced, is a good thing. It means we're looking in the mirror and trying to do better. And in this case, that means trying to do better for students. And Margaret, you're always a positive component of that. So I appreciate that. So with that said, if we go on to the next slide, I will say, as I provide our report on activity during this quarter in particular, I'll give some underlying context that I don't always provide in terms of the HR and staffing resources sort of perspective on this. And in this quarter in particular, we entered the quarter after on the tail end of losing two of our most seasoned staff who left in June for other opportunities. And then during the quarter, we had another staff who was promoted into another position, all of which are fantastic, but it created a time of transition for us for sure. And with new staff coming on board now that we're excited, of course, to onboard. And again, that sort of forward-looking view, but to accomplish as much as we did and connect with and serve as many students as we did in a quarter where such a significant percentage of our knowledge and resources were lost, and then transition to new staff is pretty remarkable in my opinion, and I appreciate my staff and leadership in their support of that. So moving forward, this quarter we did it looks like about 5 college fairs and workshops on the informed choice, working with prospective students in a college fair or workshop environment of approximately 500 students. We connected with the Latino College Expo is one of a series of 4 large fairs that we will be doing over the course of this fiscal year, put on by the National College Resource Foundation. Those are always really successful and result in a lot of positive outcomes, awareness of what we're doing and how we support students. So that's that. Moving on to chart B, we've got our student outreach activity related to primarily closures that happened during this quarter. Some of these may have happened in the leading quarter, and we needed some time to develop our outreach strategy. But as I've mentioned before, our common sort of mode is to start by getting student rosters and doing an evaluation of what's going on in that particular closure. Is there any coordination necessary with outside partners, et cetera, gathering the particular resources needed for students at a particular school, and then send out that email with those resources to all of those students on the roster with offers of either one-on-one appointments or workshops, in person or virtual, or any other resources they may need. That's sort of been our strategy now for a while. These result again in data that I'll be reporting in the next charts, both in terms of phone calls and emails, one-on-one appointments, et cetera. So moving on to chart C, we do, as I've mentioned, since COVID and the impact of the pandemic, we've seen less and less actually in-person workshops, more virtual workshops, and a lot more one-on-one appointments. But in this particular case, Husson College in Los Angeles was a pretty large closure for us, large being defined as both the number of students, about 200 students impacted, and just in terms of sort of the complexities that were involved in this one being, the coordination that was required with the Department of Education and other state regulators, as they had sites in various other states other than just California as well. So there was some coordination to do there. There was also another institution in Los Angeles that early on agreed to take many of these students in transfer. So there was some coordination between the two institutions that we were involved in and workshops, et cetera. So we did, this one did, elevate to the level of needing both an in-person workshop, a virtual workshop, and then also many one-on-one appointments, both with the students. And a big impact of this one were the parents. Is a very high percentage of their enrollment in this program were funded with Parent Plus loans, and there were a lot of questions regarding that. So again, just kind of highlights how and why we still can and will do the more traditional workshop model if deemed necessary. Okay, on to the next slide. Again, both those workshops and the email outreach that we do and other types of outreach, social media, just general awareness, posting on our website, it will, as you see, generate quite a few calls to us for a variety of different categories and service categories where we may be able to help those students. Of particular note on these phone calls in this particular quarter, the first quarter, this is the first time since we've done this. I've kind of lost track of how many reports we've provided with this level of detail. I think this is maybe the 5th or 6th quarter that we reported with this information. And this is the first time where we've got more calls in the category of school closure outreach, supplanting STRIF as our sort of constant number one category of calls and emails that we get. And I think that's reflective of both the Husson closure that I just mentioned and both the students and parents reaching out to us. And then also another sort of high impact one that we've reported on previously was the suspension of the degree programs at San Diego University of Integrated Studies. We got a lot of calls and emails and one-on-one appointments from those students in this quarter as well. Moving on to emails on chart E, kind of consistent with what I just said. Again, historically, STRIF has always been our number one category, dropped down to number 2, but those 2 high profile closures in this quarter. And then what the new information I want to provide to you is chart F. I've verbally mentioned in several previous reports that if you want to move to chart F, please, Richie, the most quickly becoming the most common and in my opinion, frankly, productive and really aligned with the sort of spirit and mission of what we're trying to do in OSAR in terms of a case management approach and really an individualized approach. Given the choice of a workshop or a virtual workshop, phone call or an email, many students are preferring to have individual one-on-one appointments where they've got an opportunity to gather some documents and get their questions and meet with my staff sort of in a one-on-one environment. And so to the point where I've said that so many times that we've gone ahead and just sort of piloted this data element that staff are logging in and that we will be reporting on more in the future. And so that is that. And that concludes my report. Any questions, I'd be happy to take those. And again, thanks not only to Margaret and also to Chair Holt as well for your leadership. And I also think the other thing I'll just add, I'll add to my prior comments as well that I don't think has been said yet is I think Chief Cochran deserves a lot of credit as well in terms of really helping what Daniel mentioned, that sort of look in the mirror approach and really helping us appreciate that the feedback that we've gotten from Margaret and the advisory committee in the past at times where it does feel a little uncomfortable, or boy, that's a tricky thing to work through, that in the end, that's a really positive thing, not only for our program, but for the Bureau, that's really an important role of the advisory committee. It's really an important role as a leader to sort of absorb that type of feedback that Margaret has provided in the past and to take it in a very positive way. And we all need assistance along the way at times. And I think from an administrative standpoint, Debbie has really sort of installed that thinking into our culture. So I think the combination of that feedback and Debbie's leadership has really, in my opinion, given as long that I've been here and seen the sort of evolving relationship with the advisory committee and the data we've provided and the feedback you've provided, that it's significantly improved under the current leadership. And I think that's worth noting as well.
Thank you, Scott. We'll open for advisory committee questions or feedback on OSAR.
This is Margaret. One question and a comment on the individual appointments. Are those generally virtual or in person?
Primarily virtual, but we basically keep it whatever works best for the student. So, if they are local and can come here, we definitely offer that. Sometimes it's over the phone, but generally it's through Teams. We've also gone out on the road and just sort of been at a location, not necessarily for a particular workshop, but we know that there have been either a closure or closures in a particular geographic area in the past. And we've actually had one-on-one appointments out in the field as well. Obviously, it's a little more tricky being Sacramento oriented, but it's the combination of all the above. I would say heavily weighted, though, particularly recently, to Teams.
And then the comment I was going to make is when I was asked to make some comments at the beginning, I was sort of caught flat-footed because I couldn't agree with you more about the leadership from Debbie and the really increased good attitude and good work that the staff is doing currently, and how it has evolved to be so proactive. So I appreciate all of you.
Any other committee comments or questions on OSAR? Very good. We'll move and open public comment for agenda item 5G, Office of Student Assistance and Relief.
This is the moderator. The Q&A is now open. The instructions are on the screen for your reference. If you're logged in and would like to participate, click that question mark inside of the square, typically bottom right corner of your WebEx screen, and type the word comment in the text field. Make sure it goes to all panelists before clicking send. If you are calling in, you can raise your virtual hand by pressing *3. At this time, I see no requests. Would you like me to close the Q&A feature?
Yes, please. And we'll move to agenda item 5H, the Student Tuition Recovery Fund.
We've got Yvette Johnson, our administration chief.
Good morning. Once again, Yvette Johnson. I'm the manager of the Student Tuition Recovery Fund unit as well. So before getting started, I want to say a big thank you to Ms. Ryder. Over the years, it's been a pleasure working with you. I know you've always been a big supporter of the Bureau, and sometimes our conversations that we had, they weren't always comfortable, but I know that your goal was to help us reach our potential and to make sure that we're meeting the mandates of serving our consumers and making the private post-secondary education forum better for everyone that's involved. So thank you for that. And also thank you to Mr. Holt for being the chair of the committee. Your comments are always appreciated as well. So a big thank you to the committee members for all of their support and efforts to help the Bureau do what we're supposed to do and meet all of our mandates. So thank you. Also, I'd like to introduce a new member of our STRIF unit. We have a manager. Her name is Janelle Quell. Many of you will probably know her from her various roles within the Bureau. She's worked in pretty much every unit of the Bureau with enforcement, discipline, licensing, quality of education, and more recently, her role in the Office of Student Assistance and Relief unit. So she was recently promoted to a Staff Services Manager 1 within the STRIF unit, and we are happy to have her on board.
And I just wanted to say really quick, good afternoon, advisory committee members. Thank you for your service. I'm excited about my new role as the manager over the STRIF unit. Like Yvette said, I've been here for the last 12 and a half years at the Bureau. So I'm ready and very eager to use my experience at the Bureau in my new role just to contribute and support the Bureau's mission.
Yeah. Okay, moving on to our STRIF statistical reports. So we have our comparison of the year end of 2023 to our first quarter of 23-24. So far we have received, for the first quarter of 23-24, we received 75 new STRIF claims. Of that 75 STRIF claims, 27 were received via mail, which means that they were paper claims that came in, and 48 were received via our new online system of Connect. At the end of June, we had a 40% usage rate for Connect. We are now up to a 64% usage rate. And that we feel is, a lot of that we feel is due to the tweaking of our website as some of the suggestions that came from the advisory committee during prior meetings, and making the online information more prominent on our website. We think that helped to increase the flow of applications coming in. So, the fact that we are now at 64% of students using our online application, we are seeing a difference. And more about the online application. In the last meeting, Ms. Ryder asked about a way for students to be able to review the application prior to committing to registering for using the application. So one of the changes that we have made is that we updated the Bureau's website to inform users that they can click on the paper application link to preview the questions on the STRIF application prior to registering for the online application. So the online application mirrors the paper application. So there will be no questions asked on the online application that were not asked on the paper application. We are also continuing to develop a step-by-step online video that we'll post to our website that will help students in completing the online application. And we hope to have that completed early next year. Okay, Richie, can you go to the next slide? Thank you. So this next slide gives you information about the claims that we've closed over the year and during this first quarter. So this first quarter, I'm sorry, these are claims that were approved. We approved 104 claims. No, I'm sorry, this is the number of claims that we've had. And so we've approved 104 claims. 12 claims were deemed ineligible. 22 claims were denied. And when the claim is denied, that means that, and when analyzing the claim, the analysts were not able to determine that the student had suffered an economic loss. And then we didn't have any claims where we weren't able to contact the student. Next slide, please. So right now with our claims, we have 134 claims that staff have completed, and they are with management with their recommendation for either approval or denial. The analysts currently have 137 claims that they are actively working, and we have 91 claims where the analysts have reached out to students because there was information missing from the application. And in order for us to be able to make a true determination, they had to reach out to the student for more information to complete their application. And right now we have 473 claims in queue, which is down from 527 claims, which we had at the last quarter. In addition to the, and then the total number of claims we currently have pending is 835, which is, as of last quarter, there were 1,004 claims in the queue. So staff have really been working hard in getting those claims and working on their claims. Okay, next slide, please. So with the continued effort of staff to process the claims, at the end of September, there were 2,201,151.40 in claims at the state controller's office. These are claims that had been approved for payment. And once a claim is approved for payment, it is sent over to the state controller's office to write the check to send out to the students. And that's how much we had pending at that time. And that was 126 claims. Total claims paid this year so far, we've paid out over $1 million in claims. And we have been, as I've told you in previous meetings, we've been monitoring the claim. And with the amount of claims that we've had, in addition to the collection of STRIF assessment fees, the fund has exceeded the $25 million statutory limit. And so we're continuing to monitor that. And in our next section on the statutes and regulatory process, we have Dave will be covering this, talking about the change in the STRIF assessment fee. Next slide, please. And this is our listing of our large impact closures. These are the schools that had many, many claims in them, and this is where we stand with those claims right now. And that's all I have right now.
Good. We'll open up for committee questions or comments for Yvette and STRIF.
Yvette, this is Tess. I just wanted to make a comment. I know several meetings ago we had some conversation about the unable to contact students, and I just wanted to give you a shout out and great job. To get to 0 is remarkable. So thank you for that.
Yes, staff work hard on that. They reach out to students at least 3 times during the review process. And if a student does not respond, then we may close out the claim. But if the claim is closed out, the student does have the ability to reopen that claim at any time.
Any other committee questions or feedback? All right, we'll move for public comment on agenda item 5H, the Student Tuition Recovery Fund.
The moderator, the Q&A is now open. The instructions are on the screen for your reference. If you're logged in and would like to participate, click that question mark inside of the square, type comment, send it to all panelists. If you're calling in, press *3 from your phone to raise your virtual hand. At this time, there are no requests for public comment. Would you like me to close the Q&A feature?
Yes, please. Thank you, Yvette.
And one last thing, I would just like to give a big shout out to the STRIF unit we're a small team, but everyone plays their role and everyone knows what they're supposed to do, and they work together very well. So I just commend the team for all of their efforts.
Great. All right, we will move on to agenda item 6, updates and discussion on regulatory proposals. Debbie, I'll hand it to you.
Sure. Well, I will basically just turn it right over to David Dumble.
Yeah, thank you, Debbie. And just want to add my appreciation to Margaret Ryder for her contributions to this committee over the years. I can only assure everyone that she may not be in future advisory committee meetings, but her voice will continue to be in all of our heads as we propose new regulations and prepare for future advisory committee meetings. So thank you very much. And want to discuss 3 items today. The first is, as Yvette said, the STRIF fund. And as was noted, the balance is now 26.4 million. Education Code Section 94925A states that the fund shall not exceed 25 million. So in order to stay within the legislative parameters, the Bureau has decided to reduce the STRIF assessment to 0. In order to do this, we will need to submit what is called a Section 100 with the Office of Administrative Law and effectively amend Section 76120 of our regulations that states what the STRIF assessment rate is. Based on past experience, we believe that if we submit the Section 100 at this time, it should be approved by the OAL sometime in January, and we will submit it with an effective date of April 1st, 2024 to allow institutions time to adjust to the new rate. Are there any questions? Hearing none? Okay, hearing none, I'm going to proceed to the next matter on the agenda.
I'm sorry, David. I was looking for my mute button there. Not so much a question as a comment. The lead time for institutions, we had a very painful experience with that this last time, turning it back on. And so if possible, I would encourage the Bureau to communicate an anticipated date, even maybe in advance of it being completed through the regulatory process. And I leave that, Debbie, to you and David to figure out what is appropriate for something that's a work in progress. But the more lead time, the better for institutions to know if there's an anticipated date in future.
Yeah, the previous example was an unfortunate byproduct of the statutory requirement. And we're working on possibly doing some modifications to the statute in the future to avoid such events in the future. And we certainly will be communicating. This time we have some lead time to anticipate, so we will be making sure everyone is aware of this moving forward.
Great.
Okay. Moving on to the next item, which is expired approvals. As outlined in the memo in the meeting materials.
Sorry to interrupt again. I suggest we take public comment on each one of those subsections since they are distinct subjects.
Okay.
Very good. Thank you, Lynn. So we will open up for public comment on agenda item 6A, the STRIF assessment being adjusted to 0 due to it being over statutory limit.
This is the moderator. The Q&A is open. The instructions are on the screen for your reference. If you would like to participate, click that question mark inside of the square, type comments, send it to all panelists. If you called in, press *3 from your phone to raise your virtual hand. And at this time, I'll send a request to Bradley Yolf to see if there is any comments. Just a moment. Request has been sent.
Comments with regard to giving institutions as much lead time as possible, with respect to providing prospective students with catalogs to have the appropriate fees listed. So again, I'm just echoing the chair's comments.
Individual, Nicole, I'm going to send a request to mute your microphone.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so yeah, just as far as like standing material as we're moving forward, do we need to go ahead and change what it previously was to now reflect the 0? Should we get ahead of that or wait until we get official documentation from you guys to change it to, reflect that in the verbiage that we have in like our agreements and our catalogs and so forth?
And And a last request here. Give me just a moment. Joshua, I'm going to send a request to unmute your microphone. And for those who are submitting actual questions or comments in the Q&A, if you can please just submit the word comment and give your public comment verbally. So I'm going to send a request one more time, Joshua, if you would like to provide your comment verbally. Okay, no further requests. Would you like me to close the Q&A feature?
Yes, please. And in wrapping that section up before we move to the next agenda item, a reminder to public commenters that we can't engage in Q&A through that mechanism, but we do appreciate the feedback and expressions of concern. And I would make, as an advisory committee member, a general comment that there's clearly an appetite and need in the school community for timely and clear, like abundantly clear communication on the transition for STRIF of turning it off and turning it back on. So would encourage you all to be proactive and maybe even redundant and over communicate in that regard would be very helpful.
Very good. Completely agree with that. And moving on to item B, expired approvals. As is outlined in the memo in the meeting materials, the Bureau has become concerned that the language in regulatory sections 71475 and 71480 regarding renewals of approvals to operate is increasingly being misinterpreted to imply that institutions have a 6-month window during which they can continue to operate while waiting to file their renewal application with the Bureau. The current language was intended to give institutions a 6-month window during which they may file their renewal application, but their approval to operate ceases to be effective as of the date of expiration. The memo lays out the Bureau's concerns, and our proposal for revising 71475 and 71480 to create a 30-day window after expiration during which the institution may continue to operate while preparing to submit a renewal application within that 30-day window. The input the Bureau would like from the committee is outlined at the end of the memo. Mainly, is the Bureau's frequency and methods of communicating with institutions before their end of the expiration of approval sufficient to inform institutions of their situation and options? Secondly, should the Bureau consider eliminating any grace period after the end of the expiration period, as some other DCA boards and bureaus do with individual licenses? And thirdly, is there anything else to consider in changing the renewal process for institutions? We would welcome any comments from the committee.
Great, and so that's we're up, and thank you all committee members for reviewing materials in advance and having given this some thought. Myself, I can lead out from the institutional perspective, and then of course obviously encourage feedback from other advisory committee members. First, I wanted to thank the Bureau staff for a well-researched and documented memo. The information, for example, on the timely submission of applications in the preceding year was sort of fundamental to framing the discussion. So I appreciate that diligence in advance, so we didn't come to this good discussion with more questions than answers. That was particularly helpful. I also would note that the existing language is unclear, like inherently, and so very much agree that there is a need to make the change suggested. And for my part, in dialogue with other institutions that I've connected with, I don't see any problem with the proposal. I do believe that there should be that 30-day period, I think, is appropriate. So I would not support going to just a hard cut deadline. But I do think the 30-day is reasonable, and as documented, captures the vast majority of renewal applications. On the frequency of communication, the 6-month mailed letter and the 3-month mailed letter, I think that's the right time to start. I think before that, it would be lost. I think honestly, probably those are not top of mind even that far in advance. I would suggest another hard copy mail letter at the time that the phone calls are initiated. The recent, which is super recent, like a couple months ago, starting that phone call at 30 days is, I absolutely support that. I think that should be done. I would also send a letter at that time. There isn't any reference to email communication, but I would strongly recommend that every mailed letter at the same time send out an email. I would add that for multimodal contact. And I would, if at all possible, I would encourage a phone call 1 week prior to the expiration date. If there is not an additional phone call, one more phone call 1 week before expiration if an application has not been received.
This is Margaret. In looking at this, I was trying to figure out what the statutory authority was for allowing a grace period after the expiration date, and I couldn't see any. I don't think there is statutory authority that allows the continuation of an approval to operate past the expiration of the 5 years. Now, if in fact the school has submitted an application within those 5 years, but the Bureau has not acted on it within those 5 years, I think that even though the statute doesn't specifically say so, that there would be, certainly there's a common sense that, you can't have somebody doing what they're supposed to do, but the Bureau not acting in them, the school suffering the consequences. So, and I think also there's probably a constitutional argument that you would, I don't know whether you would frame it as a lack of due process or what, but if the school has acted timely and the Bureau hasn't been able to make a determination, that certainly the time would continue until the Bureau made a determination. I think that probably would be constitutionally required. I don't know, but maybe that's something to consider. But I don't see any basis for continuing it beyond the period when the 5 years is up, any statutory basis for doing that. And practically speaking, given the Bureau's improved and increased notifications to schools, and maybe even additional ones as Joseph was setting out, I don't really see the 30-day addition adding anything if they get a sufficient advance notice before the expiration date. So I would suggest that there shouldn't be that 30 days additional beyond what the statute specifies as the time frame. As it is, because of the time the Bureau is taking to process these, what is supposedly a 5-year period of approval is turning out, on average, we've seen from the stats provided, to be 5.5, 6 years on average that the school is operating. And with the last year, half a year to a year of that being without there having been a sufficient review. So I think for all those reasons, it makes sense that the application needs to be submitted before the end of the 5-year period. Ideally, there would be a time period before that when it should be submitted so that the Bureau could receive it and act on it by the end of the 5 years. But given how long the Bureau is taking right now, that does not seem practical. Now, if the Bureau's procedures improve so that their approval process becomes shorter, so that it would be feasible, let's say, with your 6 months notice, that the Bureau could, if they receive them 6 months in advance of the expiration, review them and routinely make a decision within those 6 months, that it might make sense at that point to require the schools to apply X number of months before the expiration. So it's all done by the expiration date. But right now, that doesn't seem feasible given the procedures, and hopefully those will change, and improve as been discussed today in the future. I also, there was another place where I thought there needed to be some Well, I guess if the Bureau decides anyway to allow a grace period, the language there should mirror the language elsewhere, which would be something along the lines, if an institution with an approval to operate that has expired completes and submits a renewal application within da-da-da-da. I think that the language complete and submit is what's used elsewhere in the various regulations, and that would be also required if there is to be a grace period after the expiration. And then, yeah, and I think the place for that, I think yeah, I think where you see that language complete and submit is in 71475B, if I'm not mistaken. So that would be where I'm getting that complete and submit language from. Thanks.
If I can just quickly respond, those are all very good concerns. If you look in the memo, it contains, we are amending section JJ. The section before that, section II, says that provided that a complete renewal application is received by the Bureau prior to the expiration of the approval, a valid approval to operate shall continue until the Bureau has acted upon the renewal application. So the very act of submitting a renewal application provides an extension of the approval approval to operate while the Bureau is reviewing the renewal application. And as far as the whether we have the authority for the 30-day period, I have not done any research on that, but off the top of my head, I would argue that a 30-day extension is a de minimis extension, and it's necessary because if an institution is operating, if they happen to forget to mail their renewal application on Friday, then students would be harmed if they were forced to shut down the following Monday and cease operations. And so they should not be rewarded for not filing the renewal on time, but unless there's some wiggle room, it could be students that get hurt by a sudden shutting down of their operations just because they were slightly delinquent in getting a renewal application in. But this is something that is going to be vetted through DCA regulation, DCA regulatory, DCA legal, and our own attorney. And so this will be thoroughly vetted before we proceed with this proposal. This is very early in the regulatory process.
Thanks, David. I would just mention, as to your argument about the concern for students, if they would automatically no longer be approved if they don't submit within 30 days after, you have the same effect. It's just whether it's 30 days sooner or later. So my point is that if you are giving adequate notice, as it seems the Bureau is now trying to do, and maybe even with additions, as Joseph was suggesting, there's no need for that extra 30 days. I mean, you have the same effect regardless of when it happens. So I think that really, and the other thing I would say, I was just looking to see, well, how is it handled elsewhere? And I kind of remember that you got a grace period if you forgot to renew your driver's license, but I checked and no, it's you missed the expiration date. It's illegal for you to be driving. You can be cited, etc. Now you can renew it late, and if nobody caught you, you're okay. So it's a little different situation. But basically, I think the statute makes it pretty clear. So yeah, I understand you'll be looking at legal and everything. So that would be a point I would certainly look at. The things I looked at particularly were 94889, 94886, 94817, and 94817.5. And there may be others, but I was trying to find something there that would seem to give the Bureau some flexibility, and I just didn't see any. So
I would note that of those applicants within and again, thank you for the data of those within that 30-day window. The median of all of those was like 4 days, like 4.5 days. So within that 30-day window, it is people that are very close to the actual due date. Any committee members, any other comments or questions?
Just a comment. This is Tess. I would agree with Chairman Holt's suggestion to add in the email component. I think that would be quite helpful. And I'm also a fan, especially hearing the data about the timing, the 4.5 days, I would be supportive and understand fully that there's a vet out process with legal, but I'm supportive of the 30-day as well.
Right, hearing no other committee feedback, we'll open for public comment for agenda item 6B, expiration of approvals to operate.
This is the moderator. The Q&A is now open. The instructions are on the screen for your reference. If you would like to participate, click on the question mark inside of the square. Thank you. Inside of the square, type comment and send it to all panelists. If you're calling in, press *3 to raise your virtual hand. No request. Would you like me to close the Q&A?
Yes, please. We'll move to agenda item 6C, minimum operating standards related to financial standards and reporting requirements.
Yes, as was described in the previous advisory committee, the Bureau has been for several years working on revising the regulations regarding minimum operating standards to the point where the proposal has become so large that the only way we can see going forward is to break it up into smaller units. This is one of the attempts to focus on the minimum operating standards that only deal with financial statements and financial security of institutions. If I can walk you through the changes we have proposed for these 3 sections of the regulations and explain the reason for the changes we're proposing. In section 71475, financial resources, the list of financial resources an institution must have, we are adding 6, remain current and not in default on its debt payments. We are adding this. Currently, there is subsection 5, pay all operating expenses due within 30 days. We thought this additional requirement was broader and might provide more protection against institutions that are underfinanced and having financial difficulties. We would be interested in the committee's feedback on whether one of these 2 is superior to the other, and whether both are needed or whether one would be adequate to protect institutions protect students from institutions that are financially underfinanced. There are some changes in subdivision 7 that is merely reorganization. Currently, Title IV schools and non-Title IV schools are in one subsection. We're breaking them out into 2 separate subsections. And then in 71745C, we are giving the Bureau the authority to request financial information about a parent company when the Bureau is investigating an institution's financial resources. This is to prevent a situation where a subsidiary company may appear to be financially sound, but the resources could be siphoned off by a financially insecure parent company. Moving to section 74110, which deals with annual reports. We are deleting the language that directs institutions to submit financial statements with their annual report by separate mailing of a hard copy, and we are now requiring financial statements to be submitted digitally through the annual report portal. This is because the portal is now operating and can accept digital copies of financial statements, and submitting them digitally should be easier and less costly for institutions. We are also slightly reorganizing the section so that submission of the financial statement is included in the list of what is to be submitted with the annual report. Oops. Screen is frozen for a second, thank you. Then what is in now 74110E, we are adding the Bureau's website URL, and we are adding financial statements to the list of items to be submitted with through the annual report portal. And lastly, and we do this several times, we are deleting the subdivision that directs institutions to submit their financial statements by hard copy. Moving to 74115, financial statements. We are amending subdivision B to require financial statement submissions contain any notes contained in the financial statement. Notes are often incorporated in financial statements to explain the methodology of the report's preparation and designate any assumptions that are made about future financial transactions or situations. And the notes are important in evaluating the financial statement and what the statement is saying about an institution's financial health. In 74115B1, we are adding the requirement that to be an acceptable preparer of a financial statement, the preparer must not only be a CPA, but they must possess an active license and currently be in good standing with the Board of Accountancy or whatever board they are regulated under if they're from another state. This is to assure preparers are subject to discipline for any misstatements or errors they make in the preparation of the financial statement. There's a minor change in 74115B2 where there's a reference to 74110 that's being relettered because of the changes above. In 74115D, we are amending the definition of what constitutes a current financial statement by deleting the requirement that it be completed no sooner than 120 days prior to being submitted to the Bureau. The Bureau has received a lot of questions about this definition, and we think that by deleting the 120-day requirement, we will eliminate the source of confusion and just leave it that the financial statement must cover the most recent fiscal year. So that's why we are deleting the reference to the 120 days. And in addition, we are correcting a prior drafting error where we're changing fiscal statement to financial statement. Then lastly, we are deleting the last passage in 74115, which again refers to submitting financial statements in hard copy format because we are now requiring the financial statements to be submitted through the digital portal. We would welcome any thoughts the committee has on this proposal, specifically regarding the financial resources. What would be the best indicator of an institution having sufficient financial resources? Should new institutions be held to a higher or different standard in evaluating financial resources than current existing institutions? And then lastly, are there any other changes regarding the evaluation of financial statements that the Bureau should consider making at this time? I am welcome any comments.
Very good, thank you. Open to the committee for feedback and comment.
I did have a question pertaining to the 30 days operating expenses. I know it's been 30 days has been considered a reasonable measure for many years. Can you expand on why the Bureau thinks that does need to change? And are there issues with the current 30-day?
I'm not aware of any current problems, and that's one reason why we want feedback from the committee is these are different standards, and we've had, as far as I'm aware of, I don't think there are any problems, but we're just concerned that that was a standard that was established many years ago and have financial statements, financial resource analysis evolved to where there is a better measurement than what is currently in the regulation at subdivision 5. Again, we would actually really welcome comments because at this point in time, we feel that adding subdivision 6 is an improvement, but we would certainly welcome any comments as to someone who's more familiar with financial responsibility as to which of these standards provides a better definition.
If I may just chime in very quickly on this one as well. We do have subject matter experts external to Bureau staff that we occasionally work with for deeper dive reviews of financial situations that our institutions present to us. We did run our proposals by them just for thoughts, and this was one of their suggestions and comments.
Thank you, that helps. I was more curious if there were issues that were generating the change, but it sounds like it's more of a change in the times and how it's being reviewed. So, thank you.
Echoing or adding on to that a bit, I would argue that they are at least in part speculative. Like you don't have a case study example of, hey, this is, if this had been in place, I would look at school closures in the past related specifically to financial issues. And if you cast backwards and say, if we had required 60 days or 90 days, would this then have avoided some sort of school closure or given us more advanced notice? And to my knowledge, that sort of analysis hadn't been done. It's a little bit more, I don't mean this in a pejorative sense, but it's a little more hand-wringing, like that we're worried in the future, and so what might we do, and casting about. So I would definitely argue for a stronger data basis for that, or GAP, for example. Like generally accepted accounting principles are exactly that, they're generally accepted. And so if there is some sort of a broad move to a higher standard than what had been typically in place for a long time, maybe cite or reference that, like in accordance with this authorization or organization, rather than the opinion of an unnamed subject matter expert. Another thought that I have is in related to the proposed addition of under 71745 of number 6, remain current and not be in default on its debt payments. Totally support the idea of default, and I think that's a very clearly understood standard, and would absolutely be a sign of financial distress. Remaining current is vague and subject to even typical administrative delays. So does that mean then if you paid at 60 days an invoice that was received prior to that, technically you're not current with that payment? And that's different than being in default, right? So I'm a little concerned about the vague language of saying remaining current. And also just on an administrative, going back to what we were talking about before. So the 30-day grace period, or whatever you call that, right, for that period of time. Is there a material difference between submitting your debt payment on the day it's due or the week after, in which case you're technically not current, but you're clearly not in default?
Hi, this is Margaret. I have a number of questions and comments, some directly related to your questions and some just related to the section in general. One is just kind of a minor clarification thing that I think would be useful. These sections refer sometimes to generally accepted accounting principles, and then certain sections say that as established by the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants, which I assume is what is intended each time the phrase generally accepted accounting principles is used, but it's not defined that way. And the place where American Institute of Certified Public Accountants is referenced is, I think, after the section where it's used without that aspect to define it. So I would suggest that there should be a definition either in the general definitions for all of the regs or in connection with all of these financial sections that defines generally accepted accounting principles as established by the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants. And the places where I think it is used, well, I don't remember which way I wrote this down. There's 3 sections. 2 of them, or 2 of them use that phrase, and the other one doesn't, or vice versa. And those are 71744A6, 74002B, and 74115. I think it's 74115 that uses generally accepted accounting principles without the reference to who's saying that they're generally accepted. So I would just have it so that's clear that that's what it means every time you refer to it. And a question I have, we know we have had some major schools collapse with dire consequences for students and state and everybody. So apparently what's been in existence either has been inadequate to protect against that or was not sufficiently monitored, or we don't know exactly what. But I am wondering if there has been any kind of looking back at, say, some of these major school collapses and what information was or was not provided. I mean, it's possible that when they're collapsing, they're not providing their annual report either. So I think it would be helpful to look at some of these and see which might answer the question about, how long a period should one say that they need to be able to meet their current operating expenses. And if there isn't data, I mean, we do know that what we had in place for some reason didn't stop this kind of failure. And it could be that the reg needs to be stronger, or it could be the reg wasn't enforced, or the school wasn't complying, so we don't really know. But we know that we have had those failures. So it would be worth looking, I think, a little bit more to see what information might have been helpful. On the on the 717456, I had kind of the opposite take than what Joseph had. I don't know what default means for sure. A default might mean you haven't paid currently, or it might mean you haven't paid for, if it's a mortgage, it might mean you haven't paid for 3 months, or, so I think that there needs to be something that makes clear how long you need to be behind before it's considered default. I don't know that that's definitely necessarily clear. And I think that you could keep the term current, but then I agree it should be defined. I mean, if you don't pay your mortgage within 15 days, it's not current, and you have to pay a penalty, but technically it may be in default. I don't know, but maybe just a little more work on trying to define those two terms. The other question I had, not as to changes you're proposing, but as to things that might be important to look at. We know that some of the major school failures have been by schools that are in the federal student loan program, and their financial requirements apparently have not prevented those failures. But what they do have for some of them is they have a heightened monitoring, or a heightened requirement. And I'm wondering if that's something that we should be looking at, whether there needs to be some kind of heightened monitoring. Because here you do have a situation where one day you're operating and the next day, no, you can no longer operate. Is there some sort of an interim place where, wow, you're not meeting the X standard, so we're going to require you to do these additional things, whatever those additional things are, like put up a bond, or submit financial statements monthly, or I don't know what they would be, but is there some kind of interim thing before you say, yeah, they have not met it, they are out of compliance? And I just throw that out. I don't have particular suggestions in mind, but it does seem to me, and I don't think we're precluded from putting financial standards on schools that are in the Title IV program. If they are operating here, I think we are entitled to put standards, and maybe we need to if the Fed standards haven't been adequate. And again, I don't know if the standards aren't adequate at the federal level, or if the Fed wasn't enforcing them. But I think that's something to take a look at anyway. And in that paragraph 7 and 71745, just a minor typo in the last line, generally. It just says general instead of generally, which I'm sure you meant to say there. And I was just curious, as far as schools relying on their corporate parent, are there, and if so, how many schools that actually do that? Is that something that's fairly common?
I can speak that. I don't know that I would call it common, but it isn't rare.
Okay, great. I was just curious if that was actually something that was being utilized. And then in paragraph 8 of 74110, this is having to do with the annual statement. In changing that language, it says the financial statements may be either audited or reviewed. And I think there's another provision that requires that if a school of a certain size, they are supposed to be audited. And if it's less than, I think, 500,000 or something income, they can be reviewed. So I would want to make sure that that language is not, this language does not make that clear. It seems to say you can do either one, and I think that's contrary to what is required elsewhere, which I'm I'm not seeing right now, but I can find that and send that to you later.
Okay, I would appreciate that.
And then in that same paragraph, the language about under penalty of perjury was in the reorganization, they're removed. And I wanted to know, is that because it is somewhere else, you think? Because we do want to keep that there. So if I would want to make sure that it's not been accidentally removed. And again, you know, that's something that may take a closer reading of this to see, to make sure that you haven't inadvertently lost that.
If I remember, I'm not entirely certain, but if I remember, the language for submitting the annual report is under penalty of perjury. And now that the financial statement is being submitted with the annual report, I seem to recall that was the reason for deleting it there, was that the financial statements used to be separate, but now they're incorporated in the annual report. And so they're covered there, but I will definitely double check that.
I think what you say, I have a vague recollection along those lines, but I'd like you to be absolutely sure that we don't inadvertently lose that.
Margaret, if I could just comment very briefly, I think the provision that you're thinking about where there's kind of a division in which type of financial statements must be submitted has to do with the application process.
I think you're right, actually. I think you're right. And so I think that should carry over to the annual statement as well. And I guess maybe it doesn't currently.
Right now, we ask in the annual report side for financial statements, but don't specify which type.
Right. And the reason I think that would be important to have here is there is a very important difference between an audit and a review, because the review doesn't require performing any verification or substantiation of the data. So the data can be submitted by the school, but the accountant is not required to do any checking to see if what's being submitted is accurate. And if we are hoping that this will catch things, you know, it would seem to me that we would need that in the annual report. And I know that there's a consideration because there's an additional expense if it's an audit, but I think differentiating the size of the revenue, I think it is, handles that problem. So I would suggest taking a look at whether that should not also be included in the annual report. And the same thing in the in looking at that in 74115B1, whether or not that shouldn't also be considered there. It says audited and reviewed. And it could just say audited and reviewed as applicable if in fact the standard is applied there to have an audit if you're a larger revenue institution. And then in 74115B5, it talks about any audit, so shall demonstrate, this is kind of standard language from general accounting, shall demonstrate the accountant obtain an understanding, so forth and so on, but it leaves out the next sentence of that general accounting principles that says, and the CPA is also required to perform verification of substantiation procedures. So it could be reworded to say, obtained an understanding, assessed any risk, reported any material deficiencies, and performed a verification and substantiation procedures. This would make it clear that you're not setting up some kind of a different, lesser standard for an audit here than what's in the generally accepted accounting principles. And I think those are all my comments. And I do think it is really crucial. I'm glad to hear that you have some outside experts, because I'm certainly not any expert in accounting and the general principles other than the little bit that I mentioned here. And I think most of us in schools aren't necessarily. So it's really crucial. And if what they're telling you is 30 days is very short, I would certainly listen to that. It seems awfully short to me. I mean, a company can be almost bankrupt and still have enough money to pay for the next 30 days. So that's not a very high standard. So I would certainly be looking at the longer period. I don't know whether it's 120 days or what it is, but if that's sort of standard, I would certainly be looking at that. Thanks. And thank you, by the way, thank you also, again, for a very an in-depth memo to letting the advisory committee see the thinking and the questions that you're having is so helpful. I really appreciate it.
Committee members, any other feedback on this memo regarding financial standards?
I just want to chime in real quick. I agree that I think providing some kind of standard, I would be helpful in terms of the 30 days or longer, or whatever the right number is. I would caution, especially in something like this, to rely too much on like historical problems, only because I think there's a real benefit to being proactive and preventing harm before it happens. And so I think if we have some kind of general standards that we can rely on, I would feel comfortable with that without having a case study or an example of something where we said, this is what caused all the problems. I would rather just not see the problems in the first place if possible.
Point taken, good point.
Thank you, Lee. Committee members, any other feedback for the Bureau? All right, hearing none, we will move to public comment for agenda item 6C, the financial standards, minimum operating standards, proposed regulatory changes.
This is the moderator. The Q&A is now open. The instructions are on the screen for your reference. If you're logged in and would like to participate, click on the question mark inside of the square, type comment, and send it to all panelists. If you're calling in, you can press *3 from your phone to raise your virtual hand. I do have individual identified as Nicolette Del Palacio. I'm going to send a request to unmute your microphone. You are unmuted.
I'm Nicolette Del Palacio, speaking on behalf of the Institute for College Access and Success, otherwise known as TICAS. We appreciate the Bureau's exploration of setting a time period by which an institution approved to operate must meet statutorily established minimum operating standards, including being financially sound and capable of fulfilling its commitments to students at 30 days. We will note that there is a slight disconnect between this 30-day time period and other standard business practices, which recommend 3 to 6 months of operating expenses. To that end, we believe that the 30-day time period should be seen as more of a floor than a ceiling, and we recommend that the Bureau explore a longer time period given the standard business practice recommendation. And back to a previous agenda item, we'd also like to add that we believe that there is merit in exploring a higher standard of institutions seeking first-time approval. We believe that this would ensure the safety and best interests of students enrolling at those newer, untested institutions. Thank you so much for your time.
This is the moderator. At this time, there are no further requests. Would you like me to close the Q&A?
Yes, please. Thank you. I want to go to a housekeeping note quickly. Excuse me. Thank you all for your time and attention and full discussion on these items. We're nearing the end of our agenda, but it is nearly 1 o'clock and we have not eaten. And I think we can wrap up the rest of the agenda in 15 minutes. It would be my best estimate, plus or minus. And so I wanted to get a quick poll of the committee whether you want to press through, which would put us, say, 10 after 1 before we adjourn, or if we needed to take, wanted to take maybe a 20-minute break or 25-minute break to grab something to eat or a snack.
I have to hop off at 1, so I would argue for pushing through if at all possible, but that's selfish. So
I'm good to continue. We're not that far from the end.
Yeah, push through.
Yeah,
push through.
that's fine.
Great. So we will push through. And thanks for the heads up, Lee, on the hard stop. So our next agenda item is number 7, which is considerations for amending the STRIF statute. Will lead out discussion on this. This was a request that I made in the prior meeting to put on our agenda for discussion. And it's a little unusual, and I want to frame, we've actually earlier in this meeting discussed one of the administrative frictions that comes from STRIF, in the sense that if it's below 20, you have to start assessing and when it's over, but it can't be over 25 ever. And that's A, impossible to do and administer, and then B, is a very close, floor and ceiling are very close to one another. So there's lots of administrative churn and turning it off and turning it on and turning it off and turning it on. And that those limits are explicit in the statute and cause they cause undue administrative burden for both the Bureau and certainly for institutions. And so that's something that would be worthy of consideration, I think, for improvement. Another one that you've heard several on the committee, including myself, have described sort of an anomaly or an unusual circumstance with the closure of Silicon Valley. Run some of the numbers and looking at that to see surely an outsized impact from that institutional closure, and its root cause could cause maybe some improvements to the structure of STRIF. If you look at all other prior closures, all the large school closures that had happened in the last 10 years, the average approved claim paid to a student was just under $6,000. And the average approved claim paid to a Silicon Valley claimant was more than 3 times that, greater than $18,000 per claim. And the driver for that difference is the number of students that were paying cash or were not receiving aid or grant or scholarship programs. And of course, this is speaking in the aggregate, not to any specific student circumstance. Many of the students for the institution were international students and weren't eligible for federal student aid programs. And so the exposure or the risk to STRIF for those students was substantially higher because their individual student exposure was higher. And it's a little bit akin, STRIF fundamentally is like a form of an insurance policy, if you will. And if you consider having the same rate of insurance, regardless of the value of the home or the cost to replace a home, if you're talking about like home insurance, that kind of insurance structure disproportionately causes people exposing lower risk to pay for, subsidize those that are exposing higher risk to the insurance fund. And so one alternative to consider would be basing the STRIF assessment on net tuition paid by the student after financial aid, after scholarships, grants, loans, et cetera. But that's not the only way to approach it. There's a variety of ways that sort of disparity could be addressed. But interestingly, having said all that, the purpose of this discussion is not to talk about either of those things. So those are just by way of example. Those are issues to be considered. And I have really 2 questions for the committee that I'd like for us to discuss. And that is, first, is it within the appropriate scope of work for our advisory committee to consider in greater detail the statutory and regulatory parameters for STRIF and potentially suggest improvements? Like, is this something that we should look under the hood in the statute and in the regs, absent responding to work being done by the Bureau? But is this something that we want to take on proactively to discuss if we have any recommendations in that regard? And the second question, follow-up question, is if yes, what means should we pursue to influence improvement? Our explicit role is to advise the Bureau. We don't have any authorized or formal position or role in informing the legislature, right, or affecting legislative change, but we do consult with and advise the Bureau staff. And so there is a bit of a mechanical issue there. I don't know if, Kevin, I see you're still on. Thank you for joining us. So you might be able to opine in that second question. And so I want to frame our conversation now, not on what are the problems with STRIF, but should we unpack that as an advisory committee? Do you all feel it's an appropriate and within our scope? And then second, if yes, what would we do about that? Or where would our discussion potentially go?
This is Margaret. I want to speak first to your preamble on the changing the amount of the STRIF fund. I have raised this before, and I think I was told, no, it can't be done that way, but I'm not sure that that is correct or that that is, in fact, the legal advice. It seems to me that the statute could be written so that it authorizes the Bureau to change the amount for the STRIF collection based on the amount in the fund without having to do a regulatory process. It just seems crazy to me to have to do it as a regulation when the statute clearly says if it's X, you can't collect anymore. And if it's less than X, then you can, and you set the amount. And, you know, maybe there's something I'm not understanding, but I don't understand why we couldn't have the statute revised to allow the Bureau to make those changes without having to get separate legislative authority. So that's number one, that's something I think that we could raise for the Bureau to get back to us on, maybe with their legal analysis. As to, is it proper for us to bring up issues that may cause legislative changes? I think it's absolutely proper to bring them up to the Bureau. And I think it would be done by, you know, first of all, we have the discussion. And then if there is some legislative change, it seems to me that might be a thing where, well, certainly we could give our individual recommendations to the Bureau, or if people think it's appropriate, you know, have a motion to advise the Bureau of our feelings on it. So I think, and that goes to anything having to do with the statute. The Bureau can't change the statute by regulation. And I think the way the Bureau operates, it's not free itself to make legislative recommendations. It has to go through DCA and then probably to the governor. But I don't think that prevents us from making a recommendation to the Bureau about what changes should be made.
Should be pursued. Yeah, that's a good point.
If I can respond quickly on the first point, we do not have to go through a regulatory procedure to change the rate. Rate determinations are exempted from the Administrative Procedures Act. What we have to do is amend section 76120 of our regulations, which states what the rate is in order to implement it. And we do that not going through the regulatory procedure, but through what's called a section 100, which is an expedited procedure. And so that allows us to change it within a couple of months, whereas a full regulatory procedure would take close to a year. But the actual rate making is not subject to the Administrative Procedures Act and can be done whenever the Bureau determines it's appropriate to do.
Oh, thank you for that clarification. So in the process you were talking about raising or making it zero now, you were talking about it might be approved by as early as January. So it still has to go through DCA.
Yes, but it's a section 100 is a much expedited procedure. And it basically says it's a non-substantive change to the regulatory procedure, a regulatory scheme, and that it's just what we have to do to implement the notice to institutions to amend 76120. But the rate making itself can be done immediately.
Thank you. I'm sorry, Margaret, let me interject if I could. I don't want to get too far out of the scope of the agenda item. That's a productive dialogue, but we're specifically asking, and the purpose of our discussion is, do we want to, as a Bureau, discuss in a future meeting statutory and or regulatory frailties or corrections that we feel need to be made? And I'd really appreciate your feedback on that topic, Margaret. And I'd love to hear from other committee members. Is this something that you feel like we should take up in a future meeting?
I do think there's benefit. I still am absorbing and need to learn more about it, but I think that would be also part of the discussion. But from what I'm hearing described, I do agree that there'd be benefit in having the discussion.
And Joseph, this is Kevin Powers.
Okay.
I am, from the perspective of, it's weird being the designee of an ex officio. That's like the very bottom of the, I feel like advisory committees don't exist if not to advise. And members, the chairs of the committee's primary jurisdiction and the Assembly and the Senate in General Roth and Mr. Fong wouldn't be on the committees if not to be, engaging or engaged with at least those kinds of conversations. The level to which we would be able to engage myself and our colleague in the Senate is probably like that would get a little weird. But I personally would love to, for anything in the Private Postsecondary Act, I would love to, know when things are working and not working and be advised of that from your perspectives, especially because everyone on the committee is, you know, working actively in different parts of the sector. So that's very helpful. And I personally would enjoy that conversation.
Great, thank you. Any other committee members with feedback?
Yeah, I would just like to echo Kevin's words. Same thing. I would think the feedback would be great and it's kind of necessary.
Yeah, I would agree as well.
Excellent. So I think we have a consensus view that we will put that on our, this is sort of like an elaborate future agenda items discussion in one sense, right? Because it's something that we need to address in future. But I appreciate that feedback and thanks for taking the time for that. Any other comments before we go to public comment on this agenda item? Very good. Hearing none, we'll open for public comment for agenda item 7. That is advisory committee considerations for amending the STRIF statute.
Moderator, the Q&A is open. The instructions are on the screen for your reference. If you're logged in and would like to participate, click on the question mark inside of the square, type comments, send it to all panelists. If you are calling in, press *3 from your phone to raise your virtual hand. At this time, there are no requests for public comment. Would you like me to close the Q&A?
Yes, please. Then we'll move on to agenda item 8, which is future agenda items, an opportunity for advisory members to mention items or issues that they'd like to place on a future agenda.
Well, this is Margaret. For the first time, I don't have any recommendations since I'm not going to be there.
Can't believe it. Are you not going to come as a public member, Margaret? Public comment. Advisory committee members, anything specific you'd like to see on a future agenda? Very good. And I always forget this. We do public comment for this agenda item as well, right? So we will open for public comment on agenda item 8, which is about future agenda items.
This is the moderator. The Q&A is open. The instructions are on the screen for your reference. If you would like to participate, click on the question mark, type comments, send it to all panelists. Calling in, press *3 to raise your virtual hand. No requests. Would you like me to close the Q&A?
Yes, please. Move to agenda item 9 and future meeting dates. Or excuse me, I got my numbers wrong, I guess.
We just spotted the same thing. We've got a little bit of a mishap, it seems like, in our numbers. So
okay.
8 and 9 are transposed in different places. So sorry about that.
No worries. So our future meeting dates, these are proposed dates for 2024. If committee members would make a note of those, please. And there's a specific note for August 8th being in person. Debbie, did you want to speak to that? Or are we thinking that the others will be remote or?
Yes, so we have, given the new allowance in the statute, we were presuming if the committee agrees that we would stick with the kind of general cadence we talked about a few meetings ago, which was 3 virtual meetings and hold 1 in person, with August being the likely in-person date. So that's what we're proposing here. I know we did ping folks to see if there were any obvious conflicts on our dates. Didn't hear anything for May, August, or November, so which is why you just see the 1 date there. We did hear about a conflict for February, so would be interested in hearing folks' availability for those dates so that we can pin down one of them.
Great, so let's take that up now in discussion. So February 7th, 8th, or the 13th?
I can make any work.
I'm available for all 3.
I'm available for all 3. This is Melanie.
This is Robert. I can make 7th and 8th work, and 13th is my last.
Okay. Yeah. Good feedback. Anybody else?
Okay, well, that's That's very helpful. So we will follow up with, we'll probably check in with Lee, of course, who will be a chair as of the February meeting. So don't want to miss her. We'll check in with her and then send out an email confirming the final dates, but we'll consider the other 3 calendared.
Very good. Hearing no other comments there, we'll move for public comment on this agenda item on future meeting dates, including the fact that we'll do 3 remote and 1 in-person meeting planned for the fall.
This is the moderator. The Q&A is open. The instructions are on the screen for your reference. If you would like to participate, click that question mark, type comment, send it to all panelists. If you called in, press *3 from your phone to raise your virtual hand. At this time, there are no requests. Would you like me to close the Q&A?
Yes, please. Thank you all again for your time and attention today. It's a very productive meeting. And thank you, Margaret. Thank you. It was really a blessing to hear through the whole meeting people express their appreciation for all your good work over the years.
Thank you all.
Yeah, we will go ahead and adjourn the meeting.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.